Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Laura Salmon. On May 31, 1984, an elderly farmer named Johnny Muckle came to the Rutherford County Sheriff's Office. He reported that he had been driving through his field and noticed something unusual. As he got closer, he discovered a girl lying dead in the field, her face covered in blood. Alarmed, he immediately contacted the police without disturbing the scene. Several officers, including the sheriff, accompanied him back to the scene where they found the body of a blonde girl. She was wearing only her bra, as the rest of her clothing had been removed. The perpetrator had covered her with two pairs of jeans, one for women and one for men, and wrapped a black jacket around her upper body, with one sleeve tied tightly around her neck. The police found the entire scene unusual. They had never encountered anything like it in their many years of service. The autopsy revealed that the victim was clutching her underwear in her right hand, and her jeans were identified as part of her clothing. She had suffered multiple injuries, the most serious of which was to her head. Interestingly, Johnny reported that the girl's body was discovered near an abandoned quarry. This location is known to attract students from nearby educational institutions who often gather there to drink and socialize. It is possible that one of these gatherings ended in a violent incident, which is currently under investigation. While this information guides the investigation, it also expands the list of potential suspects to hundreds of juveniles. In order to focus on more specific suspects, additional data collection and analysis are required. The victim was identified as Laura Salmon, 18, a freshman at Middle Tennessee State University located in her hometown of Murfreesboro. Laura attended Oakland High School, where her mother, Lorene Mackey, taught English. Her parents were divorced at the time. Just days before the incident, Laura had moved in with her father because the school year had ended. She missed him and was going to spend part of the holiday with him. Laura was a kind, attractive, and sociable girl who enjoyed attending lively gatherings. As a young woman, she was crowned Little Miss Murfreesboro and showcased her acting talents in summer plays at the local theater. Laura was also very intelligent, graduating with honors and planning to continue her studies at college to build a solid career. She had started attending the local university in the fall of 1983, just 6 months before the tragic incident. She had just started a relationship with her boyfriend, David Kyle Gilley. Laura was well-liked and had no enemies who wanted to harm her. Police believed she may have been a random murder victim. An autopsy was completed on June 2, 1984. The forensic expert found at least 2 blunt force injuries to her head, likely caused by a rock or similar object. These blows resulted in brain damage. Laura suffered fatal head injuries from the repeated attacks. She lost consciousness and died within 10 minutes, and even immediate medical attention could not save her. Initially, there were concerns about the possibility that Laura had been abused, but the forensic results found no signs of this. However, the expert pointed out that Laura had been consensual in her intimate relations within 24 to 48 hours before the incident. It is believed that she may have had a boyfriend. It is possible the attacker staged the crime scene to mislead the police. Forensic teams collected samples from the clothing covering her body for further analysis. Additionally, tire tracks found in the area could belong to either Laura's car or the attacker's car, prompting the police to examine Laura's vehicle. One of the officers knew Laura. She worked as a cashier at a grocery store he frequented after work. He recognized her car and decided to check the store's parking lot. On June 3, he found Laura's car abandoned in the lot, which was subsequently taken to the lab for examination. When the forensic team examined the interior, they found no fingerprints, not even Laura's. This was unusual, indicating that the car may have been thoroughly cleaned, possibly by the perpetrator. However, they did find dirt in the wheel wells and some hairs of unknown origin under the floor mat. These samples were collected for analysis. The soil found in the wheel wells matched the particles on the floor mats of the driver and passenger areas, and when compared to the materials found at the crime scene, they matched as well. Evidence clearly showed that the tire tracks near the crime scene belonged to Laura's car, suggesting that the killer was not a random stranger, but someone who knew her well, including her workplace. As police gathered and analyzed the information, they interviewed people close to Laura, starting with her mother, Lorene Mackey. Lorene immediately suspected her daughter's boyfriend, David, because she was aware of the toxic nature of their relationship and had never supported it. She described David as jealous and possessive, almost like a stalker. Lorene noted that many of Laura's encounters with David ended in arguments. This was extremely distressing to her, as she felt her daughter was ignoring important warning signs. Despite the efforts of several family members, including Laura's father, they were unable to convince Laura that David was a danger. Tragically, this may have contributed to Laura's early death. At that time, personal relationship issues were not considered matters for the police to handle. People generally believed that they should resolve such matters themselves. The police spoke with Lorene's mother and then met with her father and stepmother. Lorene stated that she had last spoken to Laura on the morning of May 31, just a few days before the body was discovered. On that day, Laura had slept over at her friend Trina's house, and they were together until late at night. On the morning of June 1, the girls slept in and woke up around 9 a.m. They then left. Laura went to work at the store, where she was scheduled to work until lunchtime. Trina was supposed to replace her at 2 p.m., after which Laura planned to check her semester grades and then go swimming at her grandmother's pool. However, when Trina arrived at the store around 1 p.m., she discovered that Laura was not there. Her coworkers said that Laura had taken time off and left early. Laura was wearing the same jeans that were found on her body. Laura's car was discovered at work at 3:30 p.m., which was unusual since she was not there. It is unclear when she arrived because there were no surveillance cameras at that time. Laura's father, Salman, last saw his daughter and confirmed that she was with her friend Trina that day. The two girls had been friends since childhood and worked together at the grocery store. Trina helped piece together the events of May 31 and supported Laura's family's concerns. She knew that Laura was afraid of her boyfriend David because he was harassing her, making him a suspect in Laura's murder. Laura had begun talking to other guys because she wanted to break up with David, but was too afraid to tell him directly. She tried to avoid him to signal that their relationship was over. Laura often expressed feeling unsafe around her ex-boyfriend, who was violent towards her, and her fears were well-founded. David Kyle Gillies' behavior became increasingly cruel, making the situation unacceptable. Several co-workers at the grocery store confirmed that Laura and David had a very bad relationship. Witnesses reported that David would come to the store to accuse Laura of cheating and harass her. He used harsh words and even resorted to hitting Laura. David was very possessive. When questioned at the police station, he claimed that Laura was swimming with her grandmother and that he had not seen her. He did not mention their previous encounter before the incident. Witnesses reported seeing Laura with a man in her car that day. After they left together, Laura's car reappeared in the parking lot, but she was missing. No one saw her arrive or park, suggesting that the killer may have left the car there. The police had no evidence against David, so they released him. Unfortunately, the conversation with him was not recorded. A week later, David was questioned again, this time about the last day he spent with Laura. David said that they had a good time on May 30 and that they had not argued. They left Laura's grandmother's apartment at around 9 p.m. in his car, parked behind a church, and were intimate. He then drove her back to her grandmother's house, and they left at around 2 a.m. in separate cars. David went to work, believing that Laura had returned to her father's house. He left work at 7 a.m. and went straight to bed, waking up at 3 p.m. He claimed that he was home during the murder, and his father supported his alibi. The next interview took place in July. David added to his previous claim that after they were intimate, they used jeans in his car to clean up. This detail seemed odd, and the inconsistencies in his testimony raised suspicions, but there was still no evidence against him. The police worked to piece together a timeline of events leading up to the murder. They discovered that on May 30, Laura had been dancing with a man at a nightclub. It was later revealed that the man was one of Laura's friends and that he had a verified alibi for the time of the murder. A new suspect emerged when a Nashville woman reported being abused. During the attack, the attacker mentioned a woman named Laura, threatening to hurt her like he did Laura if she resisted or reported him. During the investigation, police discovered that the suspect also attended the same college as Laura, frequented the gym where she worked out, and often saw her at campus parties. He was also near the school on the day of the murder. Police compared hair found in Laura's car to that of the new suspect. However, DNA analysis at the time was insufficient to make a definitive match. The new suspect was eventually ruled out because the hair samples found in Laura's car did not match him, and he had a solid alibi. As the investigation continued to stall, Laura's parents grew increasingly concerned that the search for the killer might be stalled as well. Concerns about the investigation were confirmed over time due to several police errors. The crime scene was not properly secured, and police collected evidence without using gloves, which could have contaminated it. When Laura's father arrived at the area where his daughter's body was found, he noticed her necklace, which the police had overlooked. He took it to the police station, further cementing his belief that the police had been careless in their investigation. Sadly, Laura's family was right. It took 16 years for the investigation to progress. The case became one of many unsolved cold cases. It wasn't until 2000 that a police team was formed to reinvestigate Laura's case and finally identify her killer. For police officer Dan Goodwin, it was a personal matter because he knew Laura. They had been in college together and had gone to the movies with friends just 4 days before her death. During his first meeting with Laura's family, Goodwin promised to uncover the truth behind her death. Eventually, the police gained access to advanced technology that allowed them to re-examine old evidence. They sent the clothing found on Laura's body to a lab to create a DNA profile. While reviewing Laura's file, the police found a note that contradicted the alibi of Laura's ex-boyfriend, David Kyle Gilley, who claimed he was home at the time of Laura's murder. It was discovered that the police had a witness who contradicted David's alibi. During this time, David's stepfather insisted that he was home, but a woman reported seeing him in a car near the field where Laura's body was found. The woman was located and reinterrogated, confirming her previous account from years earlier and providing the police with fairly accurate details. She stated that the young man she saw driving Laura's car that day had a blank expression on his face and closely resembled the photo of David that had appeared in the newspaper at the time of the murder. In the new investigation, police spoke to Laura's friends, who described David's anxious behavior after the incident. They noted that he appeared to have no remorse for Laura's death and even spoke arrogantly about her. A new witness revealed that at a party, David confessed to her that he had committed the murder during a private conversation. He had threatened her and expressed a desire to attack her, warning that he would harm her if she did not comply. Fortunately, another friend intervened and scared David away. Meanwhile, forensic experts tested the evidence on the clothing and discovered that the blood was Laura's. The only remaining question was about the semen found on the jeans. They needed a biological sample from David for comparison. Unfortunately, he had moved away, so the police began looking for him. David had relocated to Florida in 1986. He was twice divorced, had a daughter, and worked for the Department of Public Works. David also had a criminal record that included abuse, attempted burglary, and resisting arrest, fitting the profile of someone who might have harmed Laura. After meeting with the police, David significantly changed his story. He denied being intimate with Laura the day before the murder and claimed that he had never been jealous or used physical violence. The police obtained a warrant for David's arrest, allowing them to collect all the necessary documents for DNA analysis and comparison with the evidence. On May 31, 2000, Laboratory tests confirmed that the blood on David's jeans belonged to both Laura and him. It was likely that he had been wearing the jeans during the crime, as both Laura's and his blood were found on the fabric. The police had suspected David from the beginning of the investigation, and it took months of additional testing to confirm their theories. Unfortunately, it took 17 years to officially prove his guilt. In November 2001, David attended another interview where he contradicted his previous statements. He claimed that he had never had a serious relationship with Laura, describing their interactions as light flirting. He asserted that he had never affected her emotionally or physically, was not jealous, and did not control her actions. This was in direct contradiction to the accounts of many witnesses who disagreed with him. His only admission was that the jeans found on Laura's body were likely his, but he claimed that he had accidentally left them there. These inconsistencies in his testimony provided enough evidence to charge him. By the time the interview ended, David realized he was in trouble and asked for a lawyer. He was arrested on the night of November 14, 2001, and charged with first-degree murder. After the murder, procedural issues arose because David was under 18 at the time of the crime. His case, which involved an adult, was transferred to juvenile court. In 2002, preliminary hearings were held to decide whether the case should be transferred to adult district court. On February 1, 2002, it was finally decided that he would be tried as an adult. During the next preliminary hearing, challenges arose regarding the selection of witnesses for both the prosecution and the defense. The prosecutor's office wanted several of Laura's friends, as well as her mother, to testify before the grand jury. After lengthy discussions, the witness list was finalized. The trial began 22 years after Laura Salmon's death. On August 26, 2006, David Kyle Gilley had been in prison for 5 years awaiting trial. Multiple witnesses testified, revealing the extent of the cruelty he had shown toward Laura throughout their relationship. Disturbing incidents were recounted. Several witnesses reported hearing David make threats out of jealousy. He assaulted Laura, causing her injuries, including a broken nose, and even threatened the dormitory manager at her college. On one occasion, after a heated argument, he nearly threw Laura down a flight of stairs, but the presence of witnesses may have prevented him from causing serious injury. In high school, classmates witnessed David's abusive behavior toward Laura. He assaulted her by slamming her head into a metal cabinet, pushing her against a wall, and slapping her. When Laura expressed a desire to break up, David locked her in a cabinet and banged on the door from the outside. Others heard him threaten to kill her if they broke up. One evening, while playing near the quarry where Laura was later found, friends saw David break her nose by slamming her face into the hood of a car. One of Laura's friends reported the abuse to the police, but there was no record of any law enforcement action taken. Laura felt her complaint was ignored, even when she went to the police station with a broken nose. Laura wanted to end her relationship with David, but he sent her letters threatening to kill her if she tried. He was extremely possessive, believing that if she was not his, she did not deserve to live. Laura's mother did not know the full extent of David's cruelty, but tried to persuade her daughter to break up with him, feeling that their relationship was unhealthy. She suspected that jealousy may have been the motive behind the eventual murder. Laura was a year older than David, and he became increasingly jealous as she started college and moved to a school where she made new friends and socialized with other boys. The prosecutor's office reported that David was with Laura on the day of the attack, while she was on her way to her grandmother's house to swim. The attacker intended to lure her to a remote area to punish her for seeing another boy. There, they got into a fight, during which David wrestled her to the ground and pinned her down, using his body to restrain her. He then began hitting her on the head with whatever object he could find, which unfortunately included several large stones, causing the young girl to suffer serious injuries and die. In response, the defense argued that the jeans found on Laura contained DNA from David, Laura, and an unidentified person, suggesting that David may have been framed. The attorney emphasized that David had criticized the police for bias during the investigation. David's brother testified on his behalf, providing a strong alibi. During cross-examination, police discovered that David's brother had been in contact with David while he was in prison. The brothers discussed ways to get David released, leading to the creation of an elaborate alibi that was exposed at the hearing. David Kyle Gilley was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 30 years. He is currently incarcerated, and his defense attorneys have filed multiple appeals against the verdict, all of which have been rejected. Initially, the murder of Laura Salmon did not attract significant public attention. 4 months after the horrific incident, the tragedy was widely reported in the media. The case sparked a national discussion about domestic violence. Since 1984, various measures have been taken to strengthen protections for women facing violence in their relationships. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Leslie Reeves. On November 20, 2021, Leslie Reeves and Chris Smith met at a bar where Chris was performing as the lead singer of a band. After their initial meeting, Chris invited Leslie back to the bar for a friendly get-together. What started as a casual dinner quickly turned into something more, as they both felt a strong attraction to each other. They met again on November 24, 2021, just before Thanksgiving, at their favorite bar. The bar was packed, but they had made reservations. Those who were there that night remembered Chris and Leslie as a fun couple, full of laughter and conversation, with no signs of conflict between them. Leslie and Chris then got ready and went to his house. Leslie felt comfortable being alone with Chris, as he had made a positive impression on her. Additionally, Leslie was very good at defending herself, which made her feel safer when visiting him. Chris lived on a farm 100 kilometers away from the bar in Farmer City, Illinois, USA. At around 10 p.m., Leslie sent her friend Nanette Stuber a text message saying that something was wrong, but she did not provide any further details. Coincidentally, Nanette was asleep at the time and did not read the message until the next morning. This turned out to be the last message sent by Leslie Reeves. When Nanette woke up, she was eager to talk to Leslie about her date with Chris. Instead, she was alarmed to see Leslie's disturbing message. Nanette texted back asking what had happened, but Leslie did not respond and ignored all attempts to contact her. This lack of communication made Leslie's friend even more worried. Fortunately, Leslie had shared Chris's address, so Nanette decided to go there to check on her. She headed toward Farmer City while also calling the police. Knowing that the trip would take over an hour, she planned to request a welfare check on Leslie. As Nanette approached the farm, she saw another car parked nearby. It belonged to Chris's friend, who had been trying to contact the band's lead singer and wanted to check on him. They decided to explore the area around the house and look inside. As they approached from behind, they noticed that the door was broken and there was a shattered window. Looking inside, they saw a foot on the floor. Chris's friend quickly ran to his car, grabbed his phone, and called emergency services to report a dead body in the house. When the police arrived, they discovered even more heartbreaking scenes. Chris was the first to be brought out. He was alive but severely injured, covered in blood and struggling to breathe. Doctors feared he might not survive the trip to the hospital. The second victim, a woman who had accompanied him from the bar, was taken out. Chris was a local celebrity, the lead singer of a band. Forensic investigators and the sheriff began their work at the farm, while Nanette waited outside in her car. Confused and anxious, she tried to figure out what had happened to her friend, but no one would provide information about Leslie. Overcome with anxiety, Nanette went to the police to share vital information. She explained that the night before Thanksgiving, Leslie had gone on a date with a man named Chris, the first person to be taken from the house. When the police asked to see a photo of her friend, Nanette showed them the pictures on her phone. Then the police delivered the heartbreaking news Leslie had been shot and was dead. However, Chris was still alive but in critical condition and was rushed to the medical center for surgery. Although his condition had stabilized slightly, it was still serious. Police conducted a thorough search of the crime scene, Chris's car, and his personal belongings. They focused particularly on the communication equipment in the home. The scene revealed numerous damaged items, including a broken back door, shattered windows, and a displaced refrigerator. An overturned table and scattered chairs indicated a struggle. Initially, police believed that Chris had attacked Leslie in his own home, leading to a fight that left both of them injured. Leslie died almost instantly, making Chris a suspect. However, further investigation revealed that no weapon was found at the crime scene, which raised suspicions. It appeared that the attacker had been armed. The police concluded that Chris was unlikely to be the attacker, as neither Leslie nor Chris had weapons. Additional findings confirmed that Chris did not attack Leslie. A burned pizza was found, indicating that the couple had planned to cook and eat dinner together that evening before the attack. Evidence suggested that the attacker had come to their home, and that they had attempted to defend themselves. Chris was shot first while Leslie fought back. The chaos around her suggested a struggle. She had been shot once in the head, resulting in her death. Police discovered 2 silver bullet casings from a 9mm handgun, one in the kitchen near Chris's body and one in the living room next to Leslie's. To piece together what had happened, police began investigating Leslie and Chris's backgrounds. Chris Smith was a friendly 48-year-old man who had been divorced less than a year before the shooting. Chris worked in pool construction and also played music with his band. He was known in the community as a kind and dedicated person who devoted himself to singing. Almost everyone recognized him by name and face. He had no legal problems, no history of violence, drug use, or involvement in criminal activity. Leslie believed Chris would be the ideal partner for family life. At the time, Chris lived in a large house in a nearby town with his mother and sister. They described him as a workaholic, spending all of his free time focused on his career. The family was close and deeply saddened by what happened to Chris. They had a dog named Tiki, who doctors said played a key role in Chris's survival that night. During the 12 hours Chris bled out before he was discovered, Tiki lay on top of him, keeping him warm. Experts believe the dog sensed Chris's distress and helped him through the situation. Leslie Reeves, a 40-year-old mother of 2, lived about an hour south of Farmersville. She was divorced and had a master's degree in engineering. However, she chose a different path and became a Pilates and women's self-defense instructor. Leslie was very active and used her social media channels to promote her work. When the police asked about potential suspects in Leslie's attack, Nanette provided the most valuable information. Nanette knew Leslie well and recalled that one person who had acted inappropriately was her ex-boyfriend, Robert Tarr. Leslie had ended their relationship long before the attack, but Robert responded by stalking her. He became so persistent that she was forced to block him from her emails, text messages, and phone calls. Although Leslie tried to cut off contact, Robert refused to accept her decision. News of the crime spread throughout the area, eventually reaching a close friend of Leslie's who lived near the city. She confirmed what she had heard and identified Robert Tarr as the only person capable of carrying out such an attack. Leslie's close friend quickly contacted the police to report him, and suspicions against Robert continued to grow. Meanwhile, Chris remained in the hospital. X-rays showed that a bullet had entered his brain between the 2 hemispheres. If it had traveled just 2 mm deeper, he would have died. When his family learned of the incident, his mother and sisters rushed to the medical center to assist him. The trip took 2 hours, during which they were very worried about him. Chris's relationship with Leslie was short-lived and somewhat unexpected, so most of his relatives were unaware of it. While the doctors worked hard, They had to remove part of Chris's skull to access the soft tissues, remove some of the bone fragments that had penetrated his brain, and extract the bullet. It was time to meet Robert Tarr, a divorced father of 3 living in Collinsville. Thanks to Nanette, they were able to contact him and arrange a meeting. From the beginning, Robert did not question why the police were interested in him and agreed to come to the station without a lawyer. Although the deceased's best friend Leslie reported that she had broken up with Robert, he insisted that they were still together, although he admitted that their relationship had problems. Robert denied any involvement in the crime, stating that he had never been to Farmersville and did not know Chris Smith. When questioned about his alibi, he recounted his activities the day before Thanksgiving, claiming that he spent most of the day with a friend until 6:30 p.m., after which he returned home and met only his daughter. However, his alibi was not convincing. There were many holes in his story, and no one could confirm his whereabouts at certain times, making it seem as if he was trying to hide something. The shooting occurred at 1 a.m., while Robert insisted that he had been home long before. Robert's daughter, who was brought to the police station and partially supported his account, said that he had come home around 6:30 p.m., left, and returned around 9 p.m. Robert appeared very upset during questioning. He cried and said that he missed Leslie. His daughter was confused about the situation. The police believed he left to follow Leslie and saw her with a new man named Chris. He stayed with his daughter until she went to bed around 10 p.m. However, at around 2:45 a.m., Robert's daughter woke up to noises in the house. Robert was frantically doing laundry and kept saying he couldn't sleep, which raised suspicions. Robert's daughter also mentioned that her father owned a gun. While the two were at the police station, officers searched their home and discovered a gun. When they showed it to Robert's daughter, she realized that her father had used another gun just the day before. The police checked Robert's movements to verify his alibi. They found that he had filled up his gas tank at a gas station near Farmer about 15 to 20 minutes before the murder, and they obtained a receipt as evidence. Robert was caught on surveillance cameras at various locations as he traveled to the city. This evidence contradicted Robert's earlier claims that he had never heard of Farmersville and had never been there. He was eventually arrested after being caught lying, which allowed the police to detain him and prevent him from fleeing. Chris's family was relieved, as they feared the criminal might return to harm the survivor. Just a day after the arrest, more circumstantial evidence against Robert continued to emerge, and the police believed they had the right man. Robert's lawyer quickly appeared on television to discuss the case, asserting his client's innocence. Robert's story changed rapidly. He claimed that at 6:40 p.m., Leslie called him out of the blue, asking for a ride to a friend's house in Farmersville. He said he arrived at 7:30 p.m., dropped Leslie off near Chris's house, and then returned home. He explained his earlier lies by saying that he was afraid of attracting police attention. Robert claimed that he had simply picked up Leslie and left, insisting that he had not shot anyone. However, the timeline did not match his daughter's account. He stated that there was tension between his daughter and Leslie, so he did not want to worry her any further. In contrast, Robert's daughter described Leslie as a kind woman, and they quickly formed a close bond. Meanwhile, Robert's web of lies continued to grow. He attempted to challenge the police's theories while speaking to reporters, arguing that the police had found no glass or blood in the car he was driving, nor was there any other evidence linking him to the murders. Additionally, no DNA samples from the victims were found at the crime scene or in his car. Robert's defense attorneys used these points to support their case. The police desperately needed physical evidence. Ideally, a pistol containing the bullets used in the crime to conduct ballistics testing. Unfortunately, their initial search was unsuccessful. However, a few days later, Robert's daughter contacted the police, stating that she had found the gun he used in the attack. The weapon was safely stored in a thick Ziploc bag and hidden in the yard, possibly to prevent rain damage, suggesting that the perpetrator intended to use it again. The bag contained numerous fingerprints belonging to Robert, making the discovery significant to the investigation. Despite this evidence, Robert maintained his innocence and attempted to manipulate the facts. Although there were numerous fingerprints on the Ziploc bag, there were none on the gun itself, indicating that Robert had attempted to clean it. However, he was not clever enough to dispose of it. Further analysis revealed that he had not cleaned the gun properly, as tiny drops of Leslie's blood were found on it. To justify himself, Robert began telling a story that the gun actually belonged to Leslie, and that she had asked him to hide it. He claimed that Leslie had learned how to use a gun. However, her shooting instructor, a friend of Leslie's, refuted Robert's story, stating that he had never seen the weapon with her. Leslie's friend insisted that Leslie did not carry a gun for self-defense on that date. If she had had a gun with her, the attacker would not have been able to leave alive. She would have been able to defend herself. Despite everything, Robert maintains his innocence. The outcome depends on the survivor's memory. Chris Smith, the prosecution's main witness, survived the brutal attack but remains in a drug-induced coma. Doctors report some positive progress, but it is too early to make any predictions about his recovery. While waiting for Chris to regain consciousness, Robert's cellmate approached the police with a disturbing confession. He revealed that Robert tried to hire him as a hitman to kill Chris Smith and the chief prosecutor for $110,000, even paying $10,000 up front. In response, security at the hospital was increased. Investigations were conducted thoroughly, but no evidence supporting the attack was discovered. Robert claims that he never considered hiring a hitman. He stated that he gave $10,000, but it was to bail out a friend. However, this raises the question of why Robert would hand over such a large sum to someone he barely knew. Regardless, Robert's situation only worsened. To clarify the matter, they had to wait until Chris regained consciousness. Thankfully, he opened his eyes in early January 2022, about 2 months after the attack. This marked the beginning of his long recovery process. Chris had to relearn basic skills such as walking, eating, and talking. He approached the rehabilitation process with determination, demonstrating strong physical abilities from the start. Unfortunately, his cognitive recovery did not go smoothly. After waking from the coma, he faced significant memory gaps, especially regarding the night of the attack. He couldn't even remember who Leslie was, or recall anything about that evening. Additionally, Chris had to live with a bullet lodged in his brain. Doctors couldn't remove the bullet due to the risks involved. They found that attempting surgery could cause damage to the surrounding area, potentially leading to serious consequences. As he continued to deal with memory issues, Robert's trial was set for April 2024. At the start of the hearing, prosecutors claimed that Robert had intentionally gone to Chris's house to kill Leslie Reeves after seeing them together that evening. Evidence showed that he had been following Leslie throughout the night, suspecting she was with someone else. When he discovered that she was dating a new man, he became extremely angry. Police found numerous text messages between him and his best friend, in which Robert frequently expressed his frustration with Leslie, particularly that evening. It was evident that he was affected by the situation. Until the very end, he still believed he was in a relationship with her and viewed Leslie's date with Chris and their trip home as a betrayal. After witnessing how happy Leslie and Chris were together, Robert returned home, where his daughter found him crying. Knowing that the couple had gone to Farmersville, he grabbed a gun and went to Chris's house. Robert entered through the back door, but was quickly spotted, leading to an attempt to stop him. A struggle ensued, resulting in a broken window. Robert then armed himself. Leslie and Chris attempted to defend themselves by pushing the refrigerator to block their path. Unfortunately, their efforts were in vain. Chris tried to shield Leslie but was shot, and shortly after, Leslie suffered the same fate. Robert's attorneys attempted to counter the prosecutor's claims. The defense emphasized the lack of direct evidence, portraying the case as a fabrication. They argued to the jury that the investigation was focused solely on accusing Robert of assaulting two people. In fact, there was no evidence at the crime scene directly linking Robert to the crime. Chris, a key witness, could not recall the events of that night and chose not to attend the trial, claiming that he did not remember anything. The prosecution's strongest evidence was a container found at Robert's home that held the bullets used in the attack on Leslie and Chris. Furthermore, Robert was responsible for packing and hiding the gun. He chose not to testify, which his attorney described as a strategic move. Additionally, the defense did not present any witnesses. After hearing the arguments, the jury deliberated for 3 hours and reached a unanimous verdict, finding Robert Tarr guilty of first-degree murder and attempted first-degree murder. He was sentenced to 85 years in prison, eligible for parole after 72 years, meaning he will likely spend the rest of his life behind bars. At this point, Chris finally took the stand in court and spoke about the impact the shooting had on him and his family. This tragic event completely destroyed Chris's life. At 49, he was never able to return to his beloved construction job. While he was in the hospital, his home was completely looted, and even his swimming pool was stolen. After his release, he auctioned off his home, which was later demolished, leaving only an empty lot. He now bore the responsibility of providing for his family. Friends and family remain hopeful that Chris Smith can rebuild his life, but there is a strong possibility that he will never be the same again. While waiting for his memory to improve, he practices every day and learns to do without assistance. Eventually, Chris regained his position as the lead singer in his band. However, the after effects of that senseless attack continue to haunt him as he recovers. The left side of his body remains paralyzed, and he has sought help from a leading medical research center. Chris is eager to participate in advanced research to aid his recovery. He is currently writing a book about his experiences, focusing on domestic violence. Leslie's children are in the care of her ex-husband. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Daniele DeSantis and Eleonora Manta. In 2020, Daniele DeSantis turned 33 years old. He was born in Lecce, Italy, and lived in a nice apartment in an affluent part of the city. Throughout his career in sports, he became a well-known referee for football matches. By 2019, Daniele had officiated over 130 matches during the spring season, demonstrating his success in the profession. Daniele was getting ready to officiate during the 2020-2021 season, but unfortunately, things didn't go as planned. At this time, his girlfriend, Eleonora Manta, was pursuing her own dream of higher education in law. Recently, she had won a competition that allowed her to enroll in the law faculty at the university, marking a significant milestone in her life. With this dream starting to come true, she decided to focus on her desire to start a family as well. Fortunately, everything was going well, as she and Daniele had been in a relationship for several years and were preparing to get married. They had much in common, sharing hobbies and reflecting each other's personalities. According to their family and friends, they rarely argued, were often seen as a joyful, energetic pair. It seemed that a bright future awaited this lovely couple. Daniele grew up in a loving family with both parents and two sisters. In contrast, Eleonora was raised by her mother, who had to care for her children alone after separating from an abusive husband who struggled with alcoholism. Eleonora's mother had a daughter and two sons from that difficult relationship. Eleonora lived with her family until early 2020 and was preparing to move out to live with Daniele. There was one complication: Daniele had previously rented out a room in his apartment to students from the local university. He needed to evict the tenant before Eleonora could move in. She initially planned to move in during the summer of 2020, but various organizational challenges arose. As a result, they set the official start date for their cohabitation as September. The evening of this incident would turn into a horrifying chapter for Daniele and Eleonora. It all started on September 21, 2020. Neighbors heard distressing screams from a woman. At 8:54 p.m., a local boy walking his dog noticed a strange man running out of an apartment on Via Montello. The boy caught sight of the man's cold, emotionless eyes and froze in fear during his brief gaze. The man fled the scene, and the boy hurried home to report the incident to the police. When officers arrived, they found anxious neighbors who reported seeing a hooded man escaping from a nearby apartment. In the stairwell, they discovered Daniele lying on his back in a pool of blood. He had died from multiple stab wounds. The door to his apartment was wide open, and inside, Eleonora lay injured in the hallway. She had also succumbed to her wounds, having suffered numerous stab wounds. Initially, the police considered that the attacker might have targeted them for robbery, as Daniele was well known and wealthy, making him a tempting target. However, as investigations progressed, this theory began to lose credibility. Several important pieces of evidence were collected at the crime scene, including cable ties, 2 bottles of bleach, a black surgical mask, and women's flesh-colored tights. That tight had a drawn, sad face on them, were stained with blood. A handprint found on the tights likely belonged to the attacker during the struggle. It was challenging to identify the assailant who attacked Daniele and Eleonora, but it was clear from the start that the attack was particularly brutal. The evidence suggested that it was not a robbery but a planned act. Detectives used witness accounts to create a sketch of the attacker. Thanks to a torn mask, several people saw him, allowing them to provide a detailed description of the knife-wielding criminal. Some residents glimpsed him through their peepholes. One woman saw him brandishing a knife while partially opening her door. Additionally, the boy walking his dog remembered the attacker well. He described him as a young man of average height wearing a hoodie and carrying a dark blue backpack. This boy also noted the direction in which the attacker fled, helping investigators begin their pursuit of the assailant. The killer hurriedly wanted to escape before the authorities arrived. Likely, this allowed the boy to survive the encounter. The victims' bodies were quickly taken for autopsy and forensic examinations. At this time, their families decided on burying them in separate locations. Daniele was honored in a farewell service at the Lecce Cathedral early on the morning of September 26, while Eleonora was laid to rest in her hometown, just a few kilometers from where the tragic events occurred. Eleonora's mother chose to dress her daughter in a wedding gown that she had intended to give her when Eleonora moved in with her boyfriend, as they planned to marry once she settled into her new home. Meanwhile, investigators worked diligently on the evidence and searched for the attacker, using the findings from the forensic examination. It was revealed that Daniele had suffered 38 stab wounds, while Eleonora had 37. This level of violence was clearly excessive for a robbery gone wrong, as robbers typically use 1 or 2 shots and do not spend time inflicting multiple stab wounds. The nature of the attack indicated that the perpetrator had specifically targeted his victims, suggesting it was an act of revenge or a crime driven by passion. The investigation into the murder focuses on Daniele and Eleonora's acquaintances, as there are suspicions of a love triangle involving them. However, it is difficult to believe that either Daniele or Eleonora had extramarital affairs. They were considered the perfect couple, deeply in love and planning to marry soon, making any theories of infidelity unlikely. Their upcoming move together was intended to lay the groundwork for starting a family, which contradicts the notion of a love triangle. Witnesses reported hearing Eleonora's anguished cries, during which she mentioned the name Andrea or something similar. This led investigators to search for men with that name, prioritizing those closest to Daniele and Eleonora. The next suspect was the deceased's best friend. When investigators checked Danielle's mobile phone records, they found that he had contacted his friend at 7:30 p.m. However, this friend had a solid alibi that was easily verified, so he was removed from suspicion. While looking into, the police identified a 37-year-old acquaintance of the couple, who quickly became the main suspect. He also had a strong alibi supported by multiple witnesses and video footage proving he was not at the crime scene during the attack. He also removed from suspicion. The police examined the entire list of names, but none of the men named Andrea appeared to be connected to the crime. The investigation reached a standstill, but this did not last long. The verification process took considerable time, but it was eventually revealed that the confusion arose from a mistake. The name was actually different. By this point, several days had passed since the murders. The Carabinieri were unsure who had attacked Daniele and Eleonora or why. They faced mounting pressure from the worried public. The precinct was inundated with calls demanding the capture of the criminal and the streets made safe. This panic led to numerous false reports about potential suspects that needed to be investigated. The investigation faced delays due to new information. The police discovered a student who had previously rented a room from Daniele before Eleonora moved in. This student was named Antonio DeMarco, not Andrea. The investigators decided to look into Antonio anyway. There was limited information available about him, but what they found was concerning. A witness at the police station, who knew Antonio personally, recognized him from a composite sketch shown on television. The man became another important witness and revealed that Antonio was studying nursing at the university. Unfortunately, at that time, Antonio was not living on campus, and the investigators could not reach him since no one knew his whereabouts. A significant breakthrough occurred during a second examination of the crime scene. Forensic experts found a handwritten note that had been overlooked during the initial visit to Daniele and Eleonora's apartment. This note, along with masks, bleach, and ties, outlined the steps the attacker planned to take against victims. The first step involved returning home, where a change of clothes had been prepared, along with the ties meant to restrain the victims. The note detailed plans to destroy evidence, included an alibi claiming the attacker would be at home during the incident. In reality, the attacker intended to go to the victim's house, having mapped out several routes to avoid surveillance cameras during the short time needed to reach them. The criminal had a mask and a balaclava made from tights to hide his identity. While he planned to attack Daniele and Eleonora, he did not specify his motive. After the attack, he intended to return home quickly to dispose of the bloody clothes, use bleach, and meticulously eliminate any evidence of the crime. The most comprehensive part of the note focused on avoiding police detection and leaving no trace. It included instructions for covering his fingerprints. He planned to handle other items only after ensuring he would not leave any evidence on them. The attacker allocated around 15 minutes to this cleanup process and set aside half an hour to completely erase any traces of the crime. The police discovered a list that helped them connect the last suspect to the double murder. Their next step was to locate Antonio and collect his materials for comparison. However, his whereabouts were still unknown. Detectives started to track the killer's movements after the crime by analyzing surveillance footage and gathering witness statements to reconstruct his route. Nonetheless, he was able to traverse part of his route without being seen. Detectives tracked down the murderer to a street just a few blocks from Danielle's home, where they discovered that Antonio DeMarco was living with several other students. The police located Antonio. They began monitoring him to collect his DNA, fingerprints, and ideally, handwriting samples for comparison with the note and evidence from the crime scene. He led a seemingly normal life, appearing unaffected by the incident, and mostly spent his time alone. He often visited various shops around the city, including a comic book store near his apartment. At the comic book store, Antonio paid in cash, which could have left his fingerprints. The money was confiscated and sent for analysis. Additionally, investigators obtained handwriting samples from Antonio by examining his university assignments. The analysis revealed that his handwriting matched the note found at the crime scene. With this evidence, the case against him strengthened, indicating his involvement in the double murder. At 21:40 on September 28, 2020, Antonio DeMarco was arrested. In the parking lot, he encountered two carabinieri approached him, prepared to draw their weapons. Instead of resisting, Antonio smirked at one of the officers and asked how long they had been following him, feeling a sense of relief at being caught. By this point, detectives were certain that Antonio was the murderer. They had no doubts about his guilt, but the motive for the crime remained unclear. At just 21 years old, Antonio was an outstanding student who had always presented himself well during his internship at the medical center. His classmates and colleagues would never have guessed he was capable of committing a double murder. The police were astonished to discover how effectively he had concealed his true nature. Antonio's mother was the first to discuss her son's issues. She explained that he had spent countless hours drawing since early childhood, often creating unsettling images. He was easily distracted from this activity and could sometimes panic if interrupted. His psychiatrist confirmed that he exhibited other troubling behaviors. As Antonio grew older, he changed his social circle. While studying, he chose to live with Daniele, who offered him a room at a good price. It was conveniently located near the university and close to the hospital where Antonio was interning. To Daniele, Antonio seemed like a respectful young man, and there were no red flags. For several months, their arrangement worked well. Antonio consistently paid his rent and was no trouble at all. When Daniele informed Antonio that he would need to move out to make room for Eleonora, Antonio handled it calmly. He mentioned that he planned to find an apartment closer to the hospital. Although he did not show any outward signs of distress, the news was a difficult surprise for him. He agreed to move out and returned the apartment key to Daniele on the agreed date. What Daniele was unaware of was that Antonio had made several copies of the key and held a deep resentment towards him. After his arrest, Antonio DeMarco quickly admitted to his crime. He revealed that he had intended to murder Daniele from the moment he moved in with Daniele. However, Eleonora's unexpected arrival disrupted his plans, forcing him to abandon his original idea of carrying out the attack. He had initially intended to strike while Daniele was asleep. Antonio stated that Daniele had never mistreated him, but he felt a growing dissatisfaction during his time in Daniele's apartment. He believed he harbored a lot of anger towards Daniele, which eventually led to an explosive outburst. This anger may have been intensified by jealousy over the couple's relationship. Throughout conversations with detectives, they observed that Antonio showed no remorse. He described the brutal double murder as if it were a normal, obvious act. Antonio claimed he arrived at Daniele's apartment that evening at 8:43 p.m. He first walked by the windows to listen and check if there were more than two people inside. If there were, he would have left, as he felt unprepared to confront a larger group. After confirming it was manageable, he used his key to enter through the bathroom while Daniele and Eleonora was having dinner in the kitchen. As soon as he entered, Daniele stood up to confront him. Antonio was wearing a mask made from women's pantyhose with a sad smiley face drawn on it. Antonio later admitted he planned to use this disguise for future crimes. Despite having a punctured lung, Daniele fought back fiercely. During the struggle, Daniele managed to tear off the mask, make Antonio fled without it, so witnesses were later able to identify him. Eleonora screamed and attempted to assist Daniele by trying to push Antonio away from him. In the process, she sustained serious injuries. Once Daniele was dealt with, Antonio turned his aggression toward her in the hallway, delivering multiple stabs. Antonio intended to leave a chilling message on the wall using red paint, representing the victim's blood, but chose not to do so. After committing the crime, He rushed into the street and accidentally bumped into a boy walking his dog before running home. Before entering the apartment he shared with other students, Antonio disposed of his bloody clothes and changed into a pre-prepared outfit from his backpack. In the weeks that followed, despite seeming calm, Antonio struggled with guilt and attempted to confess before being caught. One night, he wrote an email to his mother confessing to the double murder but ultimately decided not to send it. The police later discovered this unsent email on his laptop, but it held little significance as it wasn't seen as a formal admission of guilt. Interestingly, the email had two potential recipients, his mother and a doctor at a psychiatric hospital where he had been evaluated. Known for his mental instability and aggressive tendencies, but no one could have imagined the extent of his crimes. A notebook was found where he regularly documented his discontent with the world. He had very few friends and struggled to fit into society, leading him to seek the company of escort service in an attempt to escape his pain, but it proved ineffective. He longed to meet a normal girl and establish a relationship, but this desire turned into an obsession filled with disappointment. During his periods of distress, he became acutely aware of the relationships that others, including acquaintances and strangers, had. When he discovered that Daniele was in a relationship, Antonio experienced another emotional crisis and decided to channel his anguish into violence. In his diary, Antonio began crafting a gruesome script for an attack, complete with detailed accounts of torture and suffering. He portraying himself as a serial killer who inflicted pain on random people purely out of desire. Antonio explained that he started writing to express his suffering on paper instead of letting it affect his real life. On February 17, 2021, a request was made for a psychiatric evaluation. Antonio DeMarco underwent several assessments, and doctors concluded that he was sane. They diagnosed him with narcissistic personality disorder and other issues, but confirmed that he was fully aware of his actions during the attack. Consequently, Antonio was considered sane and fit to participate in the trial. Despite this, his lawyers continued to argue for his insanity and requested further evaluations, but these requests were denied. The prosecution presented compelling evidence of premeditation and careful planning, including statements made by the defendant himself. The judge even expressed his belief that if Antonio had not been apprehended, he likely would have become a serial killer, bringing violence to the streets. This viewpoint was supported by two psychiatrists who assessed his mental state before the trial. Forensic tests on items found at the crime scene, such as a mask, tights, and a knife, matched the defendant's DNA. Additionally, an investigation of Antonio's computer and phone revealed photographs of Daniele and Eleonora, suggesting that he had been planning the crime well in advance. Before going home, he messaged friends to inform them that they would never see him again, implying he anticipated being caught and imprisoned. On June 7, 2022, Antonio was convicted of double murder and received a life sentence. In November 2022, he received an additional 4-month sentence for possessing explicit photos of children on his computer. His defense team was unhappy with the verdict and pursued an appeal, which was granted on December 2022, resulting in a new trial. The defense argued that Antonio was insane and did not understand his actions during the murders. The prosecution's main goal was to prevent a potential serial killer from being released and to oppose any reduction of the sentence. In the end, the life sentence was reaffirmed. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Michelle Kitterman. When a person capable of betrayal appears in a circle of close friends, this clearly cannot lead to anything good, especially if a love triangle is involved. Lacey Hurst Pavek was born in 1974 in Tonasket, Washington State, a tiny town with a population located south of the Canadian border. Her family owned the largest and most popular restaurant in the city, which made them local celebrities. They were quite wealthy, everyone in the city knew and respected them, some were even afraid of them. According to eyewitnesses, Lacey always had trouble making friends. Many children avoided her because she belonged to a privileged background. However, this did not particularly worry Lacey. She had a narrow circle of trusted friends. In high school, Lacey dated boys but only experienced real feelings when she met a young man named Brandon. At least, that was her first love, which eventually developed into marriage. Unfortunately, this relationship did not last long. After some time, Lacey and Brandon decided to get a divorce, with Lacey being the initiator. They then began a fight for sole custody of their children. Lacey's influential family managed to provide her with the best divorce lawyer, and the children remained with her. According to Lacey, the reason for the separation was constant quarrels with her husband, although the specifics were never disclosed. Nevertheless, it was believed that her husband was a decent person who never raised a hand against her. After the divorce, Lacey got a job as a financial director at a car dealership, where she met a man named Danny Pavek. Danny was quite an attractive bachelor, well known in the city and a favorite among women. Many wanted to build a relationship with him, but he, by his own admission, was only interested in wealthy Lacey. Danny warmly accepted her and her children. Their relationship before the wedding lasted almost 8 years, and finally, Lacey had everything she had dreamed of: a family, a new husband, a home, and a career. Despite being very busy, Lacey always found time to relax with her husband, friends, or relatives. Danny was drawn to her cheerful life and willingly participated in various events. Among the regular members of their social circle were friends from high school, including one of Lacey's few friends, Tansy. Tansy was known as a party girl, which made her hesitant to make friendships. She was also involved in distributing illegal substances and loved to throw parties wherever she went. Tansy had a large circle of friends and acquaintances, also from the same town, Michelle Kitterman. She was born on May 12, 1983, alongside her twin sister, Danielle Kitterman. They was born into a loving family and initially lived in Richland, Washington. The sisters shared a very close relationship, and they also had an older sister named Melinda. Despite being born prematurely, the twins grew up healthy in Benton City, Washington, after moving there due to their father's work. Michelle was an energetic, independent girl who wanted to explore the world and build a career. While not particularly interested in family, she was open to having children. Seeking a better life, Michelle moved to Virginia and lived in Maryland for some time. This was during her work in the modeling industry, as her looks were noticed during her senior year in high school. She occasionally received good photography offers. However, everything changed on May 23, 2003, when Michelle, then 20 years old, found herself in a difficult situation. The boy she was seeing abandoned her when he learned she was pregnant. In 2008, the Kitterman family faced their first shock when the twins' father passed away after a long illness. By October of that year, Michelle decided to move back closer to her family. She had always participated in shows, performed in groups, and loved the stage, but what amazed everyone the most was her beauty. Her modeling career was gaining momentum, and many believed she had a bright future ahead, until Michelle got pregnant. Initially, she planned to continue with her modeling career, but now her priorities shifted. She wanted to be a good mother. To stay afloat, Michelle began working part-time in various fields, such as being a waitress or a bartender. It was a tough period, but she eventually secured a job as an administrator at a local private clinic. Michelle was described as a very hard-working, kind mother, remained young, easy-going, and lively. In November 2008, Tansy and Michelle attended a big city party where Michelle caught Danny Pavek's attention. They talked all evening and found it hard to stop. By the end of the night, both realized they were in love with each other. They began to meet secretly despite Danny's marriage to Lacey. He would tell his wife that he was out with friends or working late, but in reality, he was with Michelle. He spent time with Lacey while at home, often stayed late after work, walking until late with friends. He had a wide circle of friends, and Lacey did not suspect that her husband could have an affair, as she trusted him completely. One day, a friend visited Lacey, hoping to catch her at home without Danny. She disclosed Danny's betrayal, which was a real blow for Lacey. However, she composed herself, understanding the small town dynamics and how well known their family was, amidst numerous rumors. Lacey expected that this was just another piece of gossip, but days later, Danny confessed. He revealed that he was torn in a love triangle and couldn't choose between the two women. He decided that revealing his secret relationship to his wife would help him break free from the emotional turmoil. Danny admitted that he had been seeing his mistress for several months. And shortly before these events, Michelle became pregnant, which added to the confusion. He shared every detail, including how he met Michelle at the party. He claimed that Tansy introduced them and was the catalyst for his subsequent betrayals. Obviously, he sought to absolve himself of responsibility for his infidelity. After his confession, Lacey threatened to divorce him if he didn't leave his mistress. However, during this time, Michelle was doing the same. She saw Danny as an excellent candidate for a husband and father for her child. Furthermore, Michelle hoped that this new relationship would help her achieve a stable life, which she felt was necessary for her happiness. Although rumors suggested that Danny did not work and lived off his wife, he found himself in a very difficult situation. Lacey demanded that he make a choice, but for Danny, this was a big problem since he liked both women. He had to decide whether to continue living in a marriage with his wealthy wife and children or to leave for his beautiful young mistress. Several days passed during which he shared his internal conflict with friends, claiming that he had decided to leave his family and was going to tell his wife. Lacey was desperate not to lose her beloved husband and was willing to do whatever it took to keep him. On March 1, 2009, a woman contacted the police station of a neighboring city, reporting that she had found the body of a girl who was covered in blood. When the police arrived, they found the deceased in terrible condition on a deserted road in a remote area of the city. The girl was half naked, lying on her jacket, and covered in blood. Her hair was tangled in the barbed wire of a fence along the road. Initially, the cause of death was unclear. Detectives believed that the girl could have gotten lost, was frozen and disoriented due to hypothermia. She might have fallen onto the barbed wire. The police suspected intoxication or the use of illegal substances, but subsequent toxicological examinations did not confirm these suspicions. Further analysis revealed that she was a victim of murder. The unidentified body showed no signs of life and had extensive injuries. The forensic expert counted 39 stab wounds that were unusually shaped, clearly not inflicted by a simple kitchen knife. The victim received deep stab wounds from a weapon resembling an ice pick. These peculiar wounds were concentrated in the neck and abdomen areas, with a large amount of blood around the body, indicating that the victim had put up significant resistance. Identifying the body proved difficult since documents were not found with her. Witnesses insisted that the girl was not a local resident. The only valuable clue was a tattoo on the deceased's body. The police photographed the tattoo and began checking missing persons reports from nearby cities. One of the first cases that caught the detectives' attention was a report from Michelle Kitterman's mother. When shown a photograph of the tattoo, she immediately recognized her daughter, making it evident that the deceased was Michelle, who was in the early weeks of her pregnancy. Condition of the body indicating a personal motive from the killer, possibly jealousy, revenge, or insult. The nature of the injuries suggested that they were likely inflicted by more than one person. The investigators concluded that the crime had likely been committed by a group. Consequently, the police began to investigate Michelle's immediate social circle to understand who could have perpetrated this brutal attack. In their inquiries, they spoke extensively with Michelle's loved ones. Tracy, in particular, mentioned Danny Pavek when asked about Michelle's complicated relationships. She was aware of the love triangle in which Michelle found herself and knew about her daughter's pregnancy. Michelle had expressed her desire to keep the baby and to pursue a life with Danny, aiming to take him away from Lacey, who he had been seeing on the side for several months. Despite the fact that he had the same motive for the murder, wanting to get rid of the annoying mistress and save his marriage with a wealthy wife, this version of events needed to be checked. The investigators first went to the house where he lived with his wife and children. Contrary to expectations, Danny had an alibi during the attack. He was at home with his wife. Lacey was also questioned. She was at home when the police arrived, behaved very calmly, and admitted that she knew about her husband's affair and that his mistress was pregnant. Lacey did not hide her distress over these facts but insisted that they were working on their marriage and trying to save it, that she had nothing to do with Michelle's murder. The detectives didn't notice anything suspicious, so they were forced to leave empty-handed. The police continued their investigation, needing to talk to a dozen more people from the deceased's closest circle of friends. 2 days later, Lacey called the station and admitted that she had a theory about who could be guilty of this bloody massacre. She referred to Tansy. According to Lacey, Michelle had been planning to report Tansy to the police for selling illegal substances for a long time. Lacey believed that Michelle was a police informant, giving Tansy a good reason to get rid of her. However, she could not provide any confirmation of this. This information needed to be checked. Before the police had time to investigate Lacey's claims, another call came into the station. A young man contacted them, saying that he had information for the police but would only share it if he was provided protection. He was seriously afraid for his life because the killers were dangerous people and would inevitably take revenge upon learning what he was going to do. The caller knew that not long ago, a girl had been beaten to death with an ice pick. Since no information about the murder weapon had been published, it was obvious that this was a valuable witness. The informant also referred to Tansy Mathis, mentioning that she sold banned substance and had repeatedly hired people if she faced any problems with her business. This allowed her to collect debts and remove unwanted competitors. The caller knew this well because he had once worked part-time as her personal security guard. However, he assured them that he was not involved in the attack, but he knew who they should investigate closely. According to him, Tansy had hired another individual known in criminal circles as Hollywood, who was supposed to deal with Michelle. The informant indicated that the ice pick had not been randomly chosen, it was provided by a man named David Richards. Of all the names mentioned, the detectives were most interested in Hollywood. After checking the databases, the police managed to locate a man named Brent Phillips, known as Hollywood. The alleged mastermind was arrested first. Brent was found in a rehabilitation center, where he was apparently seeking refuge from police persecution. He denied any wrongdoing, claiming to have had no idea about his actions and expressed that they had no serious motive to deal so cruelly with a pregnant young woman. Nevertheless, it was evident that Tansy was clearly lying because she knew Michelle. It seemed that the police had seasoned criminals in their hands who would not be easy to crack. Yet, contrary to expectations, just 4 days after the arrest, the alleged killer agreed to cooperate with the police. The reason for this, he claimed, was that he did not have enough money after the murder. The suspicions were confirmed. He had indeed participated in the massacre, but he had never been paid for the crime. After violating the terms of his agreement, he decided to cooperate and turn in the mastermind, hoping to receive leniency during sentencing. Brent said that he knew in advance what Tansy intended to do because she might not be able to manage on her own. Therefore, a strong accomplice was necessary. Tansy had convinced several more people in advance, telling them the story that Michelle wanted to cooperate with the police and would hand over the gang. On the evening of Michelle's murder, Tansy, David Richards, and Brent came for their victim, inviting her to go out for a supposedly fun night at a casino. Michelle, who knew these people well, readily agreed, falling into their trap. The group headed towards the gambling establishment, choosing a deserted road outside the city. Instead of going to the casino, however, they drove 50 kilometers away from the city and suddenly pulled over, suggesting that Michelle stop to smoke. She agreed, but after they stopped, they dragged her out into the snow and began to beat her with an ice pick. The first few blows to the stomach were made by Tansy, then she handed the ice pick to Brent because the tool was too heavy for her. Brent himself inflicted many more wounds on the defenseless Michelle. The overall story seemed plausible, but the investigators were still interested in confirming the details. Why was Tansy so angry at her old friend and her unborn child? The first blows of the killer were not made by chance, they were precisely aimed at the stomach, yet Tansy stubbornly remained silent. Analyzing the words of the murderer, the detectives quickly realized that the car in which the company was traveling that evening did not belong to any of them. Everyone had other cars. The brand was identified, indicating that the transport for this trip was rented, but they did not know from whom exactly. The detectives began to investigate the car and managed to find a receipt for the rental. The managers showed the recordings from the surveillance cameras, which indicated that Lacey rented the car in her own name. In addition, she worked there, so she was unmistakably recognized. This made her the main suspect as the jealous wife seeking retribution. Rumors reached the investigators that Lacey had repeatedly spoken unflatteringly about Michelle. She stated how she wished her husband's mistress would disappear along with the child. Naturally, she had the most compelling motive for committing the crime, but it was not possible to connect the daughter of an influential family with the bloody massacre, at least until investigators found her at the car dealership. So, Lacey added to list of potential suspects. Curiously, bail amounts of $1 million were set for the other detainees, which no one could pay, while only $250,000 was set for Lacey. Everyone thought this was connected to her powerful family, which especially outraged the victim's family. This decision was a real shock. Michelle's mother and sisters thought that this could be a conspiracy and that they were all in danger. Trials against each of the criminals began, starting with Brent's hearing on charges of first-degree murder of Michelle and first-degree assault on her unborn baby. Phillips was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to 26 years in prison. At the trial, Brent admitted that Tansy turned him against Michelle by telling him that Michelle will report him to the police because he is involved in banned substance trafficking. A similar situation occurred with a third accomplice. The lie worked with all of this. Tansy was found guilty of first-degree murder and first-degree manslaughter due to the fact that the unborn child died. It was believed that she inflicted the deepest blows with an ice pick that injured the baby. In addition, she was charged with first-degree kidnapping and concealment of material evidence. The punishment chosen was life imprisonment without the right to parole. Furthermore, for all the crimes committed, Tansy received additional sentences under other charges, totaling 19 years. Tansy admitted that she had committed the crime at Lacey's request, while her accomplice David Richards, who provided assistance, received 17 years in prison for complicity in the murder. All these hearings went fairly quickly, but Lacey's case stalled from the very beginning. The lawyer insisted that she did not want to kill anyone, but only intended to intimidate the homewrecker. The murder occurred because the criminals could not control the situation. She continued to claim that it was Tansy who initiated the attack because Michelle planned to report her illicit activities to the police. Lacey removed all responsibility from herself, denying any connection to the criminal acts. Lacey's defense immediately went to work and repeatedly delayed the hearings, prolonging the defendant's freedom. This made the situation even more tense because Lacey had rented a car. What rich woman would rent a car for? All this raised serious doubts. Recordings of telephone conversations between the participants in a conspiracy were analyzed, confirming that Lacey and Tansy called each other many times on the night of the crime. This clearly did not happen by coincidence. Additionally, even during her initial communication with the police, Lacey openly expressed her dislike for Michelle and stated that she wanted her mistress to disappear from their lives forever. Interestingly, when the detectives decided to talk to Lacey's husband, Danny, who started this love triangle, it turned out that he was on the run. This went on for about a week, leading to an arrest warrant being issued for him. It was believed that he was also an accomplice in the conspiracy. At the time of his arrest, Danny Pavek was unemployed. While on the run, he got by with odd jobs. Despite plans to leave Lacey, his alleged complicity was never confirmed by the Supreme Court, which made the case quite confusing. Only a year and a half after Michelle's death, the trial of Lacey began on November 10, 2010. After 5 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict against Tansy Mathis. She is charged with aggravated first-degree murder of Michelle Kitterman and first-degree manslaughter for killing Michelle's unborn child. In December 2010, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The very next day after the verdict was passed, Lacey filed an appeal, insisting that the prosecution was biased, her privacy was violated during the collection of evidence, and she pointed out other inconsistencies and violations, none of which were confirmed or were insignificant in light of the crime committed. Her last appeal was rejected in June 2012. Lacey remains behind bars at the Washington Correctional Center for Women. Tansy, David, and Brent are also still in the correctional facility. They will be eligible for parole in 2041. Lacey's mother wrote a book detailing her misadventures connected with her daughter's life imprisonment. However, this book did not achieve much popularity. Moldova, December 2020. In the courtroom, silence reigns, broken only by the occasional click of camera shutters. On the defendant's bench sits 21-year-old Anna Lajkovic, a medical student. These are her first public hearings since her arrest, and her behavior shocks everyone present. She does not hide from the cameras. She reclines casually on the bench, cleaning her nails, smiling as if she were at a fashion shoot, rather than in court. The prosecutor read the indictment. Anna was convicted of the murder of her mother, Dr. Praskovia Lajkovic. She listens silently, her gaze vacant and indifferent. Moldova is a small Eastern European state, nestled between Ukraine and Romania. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the country has struggled for decades with poverty, political instability. Salaries are among the lowest in Europe. Thousands of citizens leave each year to work abroad, and corruption remains pervasive. In European rankings, Moldova consistently occupies the lowest positions, surpassed only by a few other post-Soviet states. Amid this general decline, the autonomous region of Gagauzia stands out. Located in the south of the country, roughly 60 miles from the capital, it is a territory with special status and its own parliament. The local population, mostly Gagauz, live modestly. Working in agriculture and small businesses, unemployment is higher here than in other regions. Yet, among ordinary homes, one can spot mansions built by those who tapped into local political or commercial structures. Anna was born in Comrat, the capital of Gagauzia, into a family whose status contrasted sharply with most others. The Lajkovic, Aladov family was among those in Moldova who lived by their own rules. Anna's father, Vasily Aladov, was a well-known entrepreneur and politician in Gagauzia, deeply involved in the region's public life. He owned several plots of land and companies whose income often did not match the figures in official reports. He faced repeated investigations on suspicion of financial irregularities and budget manipulation. Yet all cases were eventually closed without consequence. Vasily Aladov attempted twice to become governor of Gagauzia. Both campaigns ended in scandal. The first, disqualified due to insufficient verified signatures. The second, after the Ministry of Justice uncovered forged documents and signs of vote tampering. Despite his failed bids, he retained a position in local government and continued his business activities. Maintaining a reputation as a powerful figure, few dared to challenge. Anna's mother, Praskovia Lajkovic, came from a very different background. A physician by training, she graduated from medical school with honors, worked closely with clinics in Germany. Her career took her between Moldova and Germany, often traveling for assignments. She was regarded as a self-made woman, a model of intelligence and hard work. She provided her daughter with comfort, educational opportunities, and professional connections. The marriage between Vasily and Praskovia was short-lived, as their ambitions and outlooks clashed. After the divorce, Vasily quickly remarried, and Anna gained a half-brother from that union. Despite her parents' separation, Anna's financial situation remained unchanged. She was raised in a world of abundance. Little oversight. In her world, money solved everything. Boundaries were non-existent. She was granted near-complete freedom, indulging in impulsive behavior and facing few consequences for school conflicts. Any criticism from teachers or school staff was often followed by those individuals losing their jobs at her parents' behest. Over time, this shaped a personality that didn't recognize limits. Someone who believed every problem could be resolved through connections or wealth. It was her father's political influence, her mother's career success, and the complete lack of structure that formed the basis of Anna Likovich's worldview. From a young age, Anna lived in what could be described as a gilded cage, a world where everything revolved around her. Her parents provided everything they believed symbolized success: private schooling, international travel. However, they neglected core elements of upbringing, such as discipline, responsibility, and boundaries. Praskovia, constantly juggling business trips and her medical career, tried to compensate for her absences with gifts, attention whenever possible. Vasily, with his influence and access, never denied Anna anything. Whatever she wanted, a new item, a vacation, a spot in an elite event, was granted without discussion. No was not part of their vocabulary. Household staff never stayed long. According to people familiar with the family, nannies and helpers frequently faced rude behavior and temperamental demands. This same pattern played out at school. When teachers offered criticism, Anna responded aggressively, and her parents intervened to resolve matters with the administration. Over time, she absorbed a simple lesson. When things didn't go her way, it was someone else's fault. Psychologists describe this kind of upbringing as a breeding ground for narcissistic traits. A young person raised in such an environment can grow up believing their wants matter more than anything else. In Anna's case, that belief was only reinforced by her family's wealth and influence. In a world where money replaced authority, boundaries eventually disappeared altogether. Former classmates recalled that Anna always carried herself as someone special. She craved the spotlight, couldn't handle criticism, and believed she deserved to be treated differently. Even minor slights were taken as personal offenses, and genuine emotional connection seemed to be missing entirely. People were, to her, more like tools for getting what she wanted. By the time she reached her teenage years, this behavior pattern was firmly established. Empathy never took root because neither her family nor her surroundings modeled it. Over time, Anna developed a personality marked by confidence, isolation, and a lack of internal limits. She didn't grasp the line between acceptable and unacceptable behavior. By the time Anna entered college, she had a clear understanding of her advantages, on her appearance, her financial freedom, and a life largely free from rules. After finishing high school, she enrolled in medical school at a university in Russia. She performed well academically, but her interest in medicine ran shallow. For her, studying medicine wasn't about helping others. It was about building an image. It aligned with her desire for status, something she could showcase publicly. Alongside school, she began experimenting with modeling. At first, it was small gigs, photo shoots for local agencies, minor runway events, and commercials. Success in that world deepened her sense of being exceptional. She started attending more social events, networking with young entrepreneurs and influencers. Around this time, she launched her Instagram account, which quickly became her primary tool for self-promotion. Her feed was carefully curated: designer outfits, European vacations, upscale restaurants, exclusive parties, luxurious hotel stays, and a depiction of unconstrained campus life. Each post projected the image of a budding European influencer, a young woman who combined brains, beauty, and independence. By 2020, she had over 10,000 followers, a substantial audience in Moldova, a country with just over 2 million people. The more Anna flaunted her polished lifestyle, the more she craved validation. Likes and comments became a measure of her worth. When she is not given regular attention, she feels anxious, irritable. Eventually, her need for quick gratification spilled beyond social media. It began with alcohol at parties and events, then escalated to stronger substances. The crowd she spent time with didn't see this as a problem. Using illegal substances was viewed as part of the European leisure scene. Outwardly, Anna still looked poised and polished, but mentally, she was beginning to unravel. Her parents tried to intervene. Praskovia hired a therapist, hoping regular sessions would help stabilize her daughter. However, therapy didn't work. Anna saw it as an attempt to control her and refused to engage in meaningful conversations about her behavior. By that point, a growing emotional distance had formed between them. Over time, Anna's reliance on substances became ingrained in her persona. She could hide the consequences in front of a camera, but those close to her began to notice the changes: dramatic mood swings, sleepless nights, and emotional outbursts. What remained of her former success was merely a shell. Online, she still appeared confident and carefree, but offline, she was losing touch with herself and with the world she once believed she controlled. In mid-2020, Anna returned from Russia to Moldova. Praskovia hoped that being back home would help her daughter recover. They began living together again in Comrat, in the house that used to feel empty due to Praskovia's frequent business trips. At first, things seemed calm. Praskovia focused on rebuilding trust, avoided arguments, and continued paying for psychological sessions. Anna agreed to attend, but took none of it seriously. FDs. For her, these visits were just something to get through, not a genuine effort to change. It didn't take long for her mother to realize that the calm exterior masked irritation and aggression. Praskovia explained her daughter's behavior as stress, burnout, but the signs of dependency were becoming impossible to ignore. Late-night activity, constant phone calls to friends, emotional instability. On several occasions, she found pills and empty medication packaging in Anna's room, none of which had been prescribed. Then, in the fall of 2020, the first serious crisis hit. Anna was found unconscious in her room after what doctors later confirmed was an overdose. She was rushed to the hospital in critical condition, caused by the use of banned substances. That was the moment Praskovia realized she couldn't handle this alone anymore. After her daughter was discharged, she insisted on full-time supervision and suggested a stay at a rehabilitation center. Anna flatly refused. She told her mother it was a one-time mistake and swore it wouldn't happen again. In an effort to maintain some peace, Praskovia backed off, opting instead for home care and close medical monitoring. For a short while, it seemed like things were improving. Anna was spending more time at home, focusing on her studies, and appeared calmer. But that calm didn't last. Within weeks, the tension returned. Their relationship grew increasingly strained. Any mention of treatment would trigger explosive reactions from Anna. Praskovia tried a softer approach, but every conversation ended in conflict. The house, once a symbol of stability, turned into a battleground of silent hostility. By the end of the year, the atmosphere had become unbearable. Praskovia contacted doctors, researched clinics, and began preparing paperwork for involuntary treatment. It was a last resort. She had no other option. In the final weeks leading up to the tragedy, the tension inside the house had reached a breaking point. Two women under the same roof, living in what felt like two separate realities. A mother desperately trying to save her daughter, and a daughter unwilling, orunable, to admit she needed help. December 4, 2020. Praskovia had just returned from Germany, where she'd spent several days at a professional conference. Friends later said she looked tired but composed and planned to spend the weekend at home with her daughter. That evening, around 7:00 p.m., she arrived at the house she and Anna shared. The housekeeper wasn't there that night. Praskovia had made a firm decision. After repeated failed attempts to convince Anna to enter treatment willingly, She had gathered all the necessary paperwork and filled out the referral forms for a private clinic. At first, the conversation was calm. Praskovia explained why treatment was necessary, framing it as a chance for Anna to regain control of her life. Anna responded first with indifference, then with irritation. When her mother revealed that everything had already been arranged, that doctors were expecting them the next morning, the tension exploded into shouting. According to investigators, Anna accused her mother of controlling her, interfering, and trying to humiliate her. Praskovia tried to de-escalate the situation, but emotions had gone too far. Around 8:00 p.m., there was a sudden outburst of aggression. Anna went to the kitchen and grabbed a knife. She took a knife and stabbed her mother in the chest multiple times. While Praskovia was left bleeding on the floor, Anna is said to have cut out her still beating heart. What followed happened in a matter of minutes. Afterward, Anna went to the bathroom. She carefully cleaned herself, changed clothes, and left the house. Investigation documents noted that she showed no visible signs of panic and kept her phone, personal documents with her. Anna went to her boyfriend's nearby apartment. According to him, she walked in calmly and said, "It's over. She's not in the way anymore." At first, he thought it was just a dramatic way of describing a fight. But as Anna shared more details, laughing almost jokingly, he began to realize it might be more serious. When he asked her directly if she was telling the truth, she just shrugged and laughed. Late that night, they left his apartment, bought champagne, and went out to a restaurant. Witnesses said Anna showed no signs of stress. She looked relaxed, even carefree. After dinner, she stayed the night at his place. The next morning, while Anna was still asleep, her boyfriend decided to check for himself. He went to the Lajkovic home. The front door was unlocked, and the house was silent. Inside the house, he was horrified to discover Praskovia's body. Immediately, he called emergency services. Law enforcement arrived shortly after. Officers documented the scene and quickly identified Anna as a person of interest. Neighbors reported hearing shouting the night before, but said they hadn't intervened, assuming it was a typical family argument. After receiving a report from Anna's boyfriend, a search for the suspect was launched. Authorities eventually located her at a friend's home in a nearby district. During the arrest, she didn't resist. She was calm and detached. After her arrest, Anna was taken to the Comrat Police Department holding facility. Detectives pieced together a clear timeline of her actions after the incident and determined that she had composure, showing no visible panic. During her first interrogation, Anna denied any wrongdoing and appeared confident. Her answers were brief, often accompanied by a faint smile. One investigator later said it seemed as if she didn't take any of it seriously. That impression would later be confirmed by a psychological evaluation. Experts observed a lack of emotional response to the gravity of the situation, something that diverged sharply from what would be expected in a high-stress event. The assessment described Anna as having strong narcissistic tendencies, a pattern of manipulative behavior, and a flair for the dramatic. She showed no signs of remorse or guilt. Meanwhile, witness statements were being gathered. Neighbors reported hearing shouting on the night of December 4000, Idov, but didn't intervene, thinking it was just another argument. Friends, acquaintances confirmed that tensions between Anna and her mother had escalated in recent months, mostly over the subject of treatment. One university lecturer shared that, shortly before returning to Moldova, Anna had seemed unstable and often spoke about feeling pressured by her family. Anna's father, Vasily Aladov, did not speak publicly. However, relatives from his side of the family claimed they did not believe she was responsible, suggesting that she may have experienced a psychological breakdown. The story of a medical student accused of committing a crime against her physician mother spread rapidly through regional and international news. Final hearings were held in Chisinau in December 2021. By then, the investigation had lasted nearly a year. Dozens of interviews had been conducted, independent evaluations ordered, and psychiatric records reviewed. The trial itself was closed to the public, but the main findings were later confirmed by official sources. According to a psychiatric evaluation, at the time of the incident, Anna was in a psychological state that prevented her from fully understanding the nature and consequences of her actions. The assessment revealed signs of a severe mental disorder, exacerbated by psychoactive substances and emotional instability. The prosecution pushed for the maximum sentence, insisting Anna was fully responsible for her actions. They pointed to the sequence of events following the crime: cleaning herself, changing clothes, and attempting to flee, as evidence of intent and awareness. However, the defense submitted additional medical reports and expert testimony, all reinforcing the argument that Anna had lost control of her behavior. After reviewing both sides, the court accepted the findings of the psychiatric experts. Anna Lajkovic was ruled not criminally responsible and was ordered to undergo compulsory treatment at a high-security psychiatric facility. The sentence was open-ended. Her release would only be possible if a medical board determined she had shown consistent, verifiable improvement. Public reaction to the verdict was deeply divided. Some in Gagosiya and Chisinau considered it a just outcome, while others saw it as preferential treatment, possibly influenced by family connections. Journalists noted that in Moldova, where life sentences for women are not legally permitted, this verdict amounted to indefinite institutionalization. After the court's decision was announced, prosecutors filed an appeal, but the ruling was upheld. Anna's father declined to speak publicly. Her maternal relatives expressed hope that she would receive the care she needed and never return to her former life. One summer afternoon in the small town of Arlington, Indiana, seemed as peaceful as any other day. In a place with only a few hundred residents, everyone knew each other. Everyone trusted each other. But that very peace concealed a terrible secret. On June 7, 2023, 17-year-old Valerie Tyndall left home for work. She said she would be back for dinner. But as night fell, Valerie didn't return. Her phone went silent. And in the small house, fear began to creep in. The last person to see Valerie was her neighbor across the street, a 59-year-old man who used to hire her to mow the lawn. He said she might have run away. But the words came too quickly. Too certainly. Months passed. Seasons passed. Then, one late autumn day, the police and FBI returned to his property. Amidst a strange pile of rubbish, they unearthed a wooden box. Inside was the body of a young girl. Her nails were painted bright orange, the exact color Valerie posted on Facebook before she disappeared. It wasn't just the death of a girl, but a chilling warning: sometimes evil isn't in the shadows. It stands right at your doorstep. Valerie Tyndall was born on August 29, 2005, in Indianapolis, Indiana, USA, into a large family. She had one brother and 3 older sisters. When Valerie was young, she experienced an unpleasant event, though the details were kept private by her family. Following that incident, her mother decided the family should move somewhere safer, a decision everyone supported. They moved to Arlington, a small town less than an hour's drive from Indianapolis. With a population of about 300, Valerie's parents hoped it would be a peaceful environment to raise their children, far from the hustle and bustle of the big city. Thanks to their friendly and positive personalities, the whole family quickly integrated into the local community. Life remained calm and stable until the summer of 2023. Valerie, then 17, was preparing for her final year of high school. She was full of expectations for this school year, hoping to graduate soon and begin her adult life. Besides her studies, she loves animals, enjoys taking care of children, and has dreamed of becoming a veterinarian since elementary school. She has always strived to achieve that goal. As a senior, Valerie worked multiple jobs to save money for college, as she didn't want to be a burden on her family. Normally, she took Wednesdays off to meet friends. But that day was different. Even though it was Wednesday, she told her mother she was going to work by June 7, 2023. During summer break, Valerie was focused on working and saving money for college rather than relaxing. She held several jobs and typically took Wednesdays off to spend time with friends. However, on this particular Wednesday, June 7, 2023, she told her mother she was going to work. That day, Valerie planned to visit her neighbor, Patrick Scott, 59, who lived across the street. She often helped him tend his large lawn, and he paid her. He had a gardening business and sometimes hired her when he had a lot of work. They often referred to each other as friends, though Valerie's family suspected Patrick might have a different interest in her. Her mother grew uneasy when Valerie said she would spend the whole day working for him. Although Valerie's family had known Patrick for years and considered him polite and friendly, especially since Valerie was also friends with his granddaughter, her mother couldn't shake her concern. Patrick assured her that everything was appropriate, and his calm manner eased her doubts. Over time, the two families maintained a good relationship, and Valerie continued working for him regularly. By the summer of 2023, Valerie had been helping Patrick for about 2 years. Her mother believed he truly supported Valerie's ambitions and saw his jobs as an opportunity for her daughter to earn money for college and build experience for the future. Valerie played an important role in convincing her mother because Patrick paid her well and offered her steady work. However, there were reasons to doubt Patrick's character. According to her mother, he had staged dramatic scenes several times and sometimes acted like a jealous boyfriend toward Valerie. Despite being much older, he often made insulting remarks about the boys she spent time with, which seemed inappropriate. After working together for a while, Valerie gradually became more comfortable with Patrick's strange behavior and simply attributed it to his eccentricity. Her family also felt reassured, as Patrick had a good reputation and was respected in the community. On June 7, 2023, Valerie planned to spend most of the day mowing lawns for Patrick's clients. She promised to be home in time for dinner, but when night fell, she still hadn't returned. Concerned, her mother tried calling her, but the phone remained unanswered. When Valerie's mother asked Patrick about her, he said that she hadn't worked with him that day and that they had no plans to go anywhere together. Her mother was stunned. She couldn't understand why Valerie would lie. She tried to calm herself by assuming that Valerie had gone out with friends or perhaps was seeing a new boyfriend she hadn't mentioned. Still, she planned to question Valerie once she returned. Since her daughter was normally open and self-reliant, that evening, Patrick and his wife, Linda, went to Valerie's house. Instead of offering comfort, Patrick suggested that Valerie had probably run away. He presented his theory confidently, but after a while, Valerie's mother began to sense something was wrong. Patrick seemed to grasp the situation too quickly, while Valerie hadn't been missing long enough to draw such a conclusion. There was no reason to believe Valerie had run away. She had never done so before, and she had no mental health issues or addictions. This disappearance was completely out of character. The more she thought about it, the more suspicious her mother became. She sensed Patrick was trying to manipulate her thoughts and steer the story in his favor. She started to wonder if he had something to do with Valerie's disappearance, which might explain why he was trying to influence her so strongly. Still, she decided to wait before contacting the police, hoping Valerie would return on her own. That night, she remained convinced her daughter was simply out with friends and would come home soon. But when the family woke up on the morning of June 8, 2023, and Valerie's room was still empty, her mother panicked. Since she still couldn't reach Valerie, she called the police. Valerie Tyndall was officially reported missing, and an Amber Alert was issued. According to the family, Valerie was last seen around noon on June 7. Her mother shared her growing suspicions with investigators, who agreed that Valerie might be in danger. Police distributed her description, photo, and details of her car, including its make, model, and license plate number. They began a serious search and quickly questioned Patrick, not only because of his ambiguous relationship with Valerie, but also because she disappeared while on her way to work for him. Patrick had already been screened and had no criminal record, especially not for violent behavior. When first questioned by police, he appeared nervous and claimed he hadn't seen Valerie on June 7, saying their last meeting was on June 6. At first, his story seemed believable, but the police already had statements from other witnesses that contradicted him. Several witnesses reported seeing Patrick and Valerie together on June 7, the day she went missing. Some even multiple times. One woman said she saw Patrick driving Valerie's car. This immediately raised suspicion. When Patrick learned the police had this information, he changed his story. Now admitting that he had seen Valerie on the morning of June 7, he said he had driven Valerie's car to take her to a nearby town about 10 minutes from Arlington, dropped her off, and never saw her again. During the following days, as the police continued to question him, Patrick's story kept changing slightly. His final version during interrogation was that on June 7, he and Valerie met at a store in Shelbyville. He used his company car, and Valerie asked to be dropped off in a neighboring town. Patrick said that when she got out, she walked toward a light blue pickup truck driven by an unknown man, and he never saw her after that. However, shortly afterward, Patrick changed his statement again. He said that he hadn't dropped Valerie off anywhere, but had only driven her around town before returning home. A neighbor asked him to house sit while they went to work, so he left Valerie there. When he returned, she was gone. He assumed she had gone home, but when her mother came looking for her daughter, he realized something was amiss. Patrick insisted that he didn't know where Valerie was. However, investigators quickly determined that his story wasn't entirely true. He had at least admitted that Valerie had been at his house, which was the last confirmed location. Police also suspected he lied about being at work all day, which deepened their suspicions. To investigate further, police asked Patrick to hand over his phone. He handed it over willingly. Phone data revealed that he hadn't gone to work at all but had spent almost the entire day of June 7 on his property. The message records between him and Valerie were also revealing. Valerie had sent Patrick a single message on June 7 at 11:23 a.m., saying she would be joining him soon. Patrick sent her two messages afterward, one at 5:40 p.m. on June 7 and another at 2:46 p.m. on June 8, asking where she was. This evidence showed that Patrick had been lying from the beginning. He clearly knew about their planned meeting, and his attempts to contact her later appeared to be an act. Investigators also learned that Valerie's mother had given Patrick full access to her daughter's location data through the app Life 360 app in 2021. When Valerie started working for him, this meant Patrick could see Valerie's location in real time and didn't need to ask her where she was. It seemed he was deliberately trying to distance himself from her disappearance and build a false alibi. Despite their suspicions, the police did not have enough evidence to arrest Patrick. His constantly changing statements and attempts to mislead investigators, however, made him the main suspect. Investigators wanted to search his home, but needed a search warrant to do so. They decided to charge him with giving multiple false statements that had obstructed the investigation. While this was not enough for an arrest, it provided grounds for a search. Surprisingly, the thorough search of Patrick's house revealed nothing. The search for Valerie continued for months. It became increasingly clear that Valerie was unlikely to be found alive. She had been completely inactive on social media, had made no financial transactions, and had not used her phone. At one point, the investigation appeared to have reached a dead end. After that, On October 11, 2023, the investigators decided to carefully examine Patrick Scott's property. This time, they brought along specially trained sniffer dogs, believing Patrick was connected to the disappearance. Remarkably, all 4 dogs instantly picked up the scent of a corpse and ran in the same direction. Toward a small pond on the property, the officers called in a diving team, but no body was found. Still, the dogs continued reacting to the water. Handlers explained that this response was expected, as dogs can detect even trace amounts of scent that might have been carried by the wind and absorbed by the water. Although Valerie's body wasn't found, the dog's behavior strengthened suspicions that she had been on Patrick's property. As a result, investigators ordered an aerial topographical survey for the next day. This survey aimed to detect recently disturbed soil, which could indicate a burial site. Several areas on the property showed signs of soil disruption, but none led to concrete results. The investigation once again stalled for several weeks. Valerie remained officially missing, as there was still no definitive proof of her death. 7 weeks after the aerial survey, the case took a new turn. On November 28, 2023, investigators decided to inspect Patrick's property one more time. This time, both local law enforcement and FBI agents were involved. During the aerial review, they noticed a strange pile of garbage in an area far from the house, an unusual place to dump household waste. Investigators suspected the pile could be concealing something. Using specialized equipment, they detected shallow cavities under the mound. When the site was excavated, a wooden box emitting a strong odor was uncovered. Inside, they found the body of a girl wrapped in black plastic. Due to decomposition, her identity was initially uncertain, but investigators noticed her bright orange nail polish, matching the color Valerie had posted about on social media the day before she disappeared. The body was later confirmed to be Valerie Tyndall. Patrick Scott, 59, was arrested and charged with her kidnapping and murder. After his arrest, Patrick resisted but was eventually subdued. During interrogation, he confessed. He said he had met Valerie on June 7 at an apartment complex in Shelbyville, having lured her there with a promise of lunch at a restaurant in Indianapolis. Around 1:00 p.m., he brought her to his home. Less than 30 minutes earlier, her phone had gone inactive. Patrick admitted to abusing Valerie and using his belt in the attack, a belt he reportedly continued to wear until his arrest. Afterward, he returned home and tried to delete app data and digital activity from his phone. However, he overlooked the Apple Health app, which retained crucial movement and time records that later supported the investigation. Patrick claimed that Valerie tried to blackmail him into buying her a new car, threatening to tell everyone that he had seduced her if he refused. This led to an argument that escalated into a fight, during which Patrick attacked her in a moment of rage. He insisted the killing was not intentional and blamed it on losing control. The incident took place in Patrick's bedroom. Upon realizing he had killed Valerie, Patrick took her body to the home office, a place other family members never visited. The body remained there for nearly a day, wrapped only in plastic wrap. On June 8, Patrick bought boards from a hardware store to build a makeshift box to bury the body. He stated that there was already a hole on his property, and he planned to fill it with cement. The size of the hole was perfect for Valerie's grave. When questioned, he could not explain how the hole had appeared, raising suspicions that the killing was premeditated and the hole had been dug in advance. Patrick later claimed he had planned to use it to dispose of old video cassettes. Investigators doubted this explanation. Why would anyone bury tapes instead of simply throwing them away? A new police report later revealed more about the case. It stated that Patrick invited Valerie to his home intending to seduce her. When she refused, he became enraged, killed her, and then buried her in the homemade wooden box. Investigators also determined what happened to Valerie's car. Witnesses saw Patrick driving it on June 7. To hide his involvement, he drove the car to a nearby suburb, removed the license plates, abandoned it near a housing development, and threw the keys into a river. The car was eventually found, but the keys were not, and Patrick later claimed he couldn't remember where he had thrown them. In early 2024, Patrick began denying any relationship with Valerie beyond friendship and work. But the evidence contradicted him. They had spent a lot of time together, shopping, eating in cafes, and even visiting a water park. As shown by photographs, Valerie's mother remembered her daughter asking for permission for that trip, believing Patrick was there with his family. Patrick's wife had also noticed his growing interest in Valerie but assumed it stemmed from his fondness for children and Valerie's friendship with their granddaughter. Nobody imagined that this seemingly kind man had inappropriate feelings for a 17-year-old girl. However, the investigation proved that Patrick had feelings for Valerie. What bothered the police most was his indifference, completely cold when talking about his crime and the young girl he had murdered. However, some people blamed Valerie's parents, arguing that her mother had ignored warning signs and trusted Patrick too much. Until the case was solved, no one realized how deceitful he truly was. Valerie's mother believed her daughter only worked for him. He was seen as a close family friend. Valerie had worked for Patrick for over 2 years, during which he gained her and her family's complete trust. She was also close to his granddaughter, which gave him further access to her. At a recent press conference, Valerie's family spoke about the trauma they endured and how Patrick's behavior changed once the search for Valerie began. He became withdrawn, avoiding her family and displaying hostility towards them. Whenever her mother tried to speak to him during the 5-month investigation, he would quickly flee into the house. During the investigation, it was discovered that a few weeks after Valerie's disappearance, witnesses saw Patrick burning various items in his backyard. He had built a large fire and had even torn down a shed to get wood for fuel. This behavior seemed suspicious, and investigators suspected he was destroying additional evidence. Patrick refused to comment on the matter. On December 14, a funeral service for 17-year-old Valerie was held at the Christian church in Arlington. Nearly the entire congregation attended. The entire community still couldn't believe that in their close-knit neighborhood, there could be such a cruel person capable of taking the life of a young girl. Patrick's trial for kidnapping and murder was scheduled for April 2024. Because he confessed to his crime, the trial was conducted under a simplified procedure, sparing Valerie's family from having to endure further pain by reliving the entire incident. Patrick maintained his confession, yet it was believed he might not fully grasp the severity of his crime. He went on to claim that Valerie had tried to blackmail him into buying her a new car. Ultimately, Patrick Scott accepted a plea deal, admitting guilt to murder, kidnapping, and evidence tampering. Under the agreement, he was sentenced to 57 years in prison. Valerie Tyndall's family was satisfied with the sentence, as given Patrick's age, he will likely spend the rest of his life in jail. On the evening of Friday, October 13, 1995, a 16-year-old girl staggered into a hospital in Abbotsford, Canada, in a state of near unconsciousness. Her body was covered in blood, and her head bore multiple severe wounds, leaving the doctors stunned. No one understood how she had managed to get to the hospital on her own. But as she teetered between life and death, her fragmented words revealed a nightmare that had just unfolded in the darkness, where 2 teenage girls were abducted in the street, one fighting back desperately, the other vanishing without a trace. From that moment, the entire city of Abbotsford was gripped by fear. A ruthless predator was at large, sending anonymous calls challenging the police, seemingly aware of every step of the investigation, as if he were watching them every second. On Friday, October 13, 1995, in the town of Abbotsford, Canada, a 16-year-old girl named Misty Cockerill, believed to possess psychic abilities, arrived at the hospital on her own in critical condition. She was covered in blood and had multiple serious injuries. She demanded an X-ray, and doctors discovered multiple skull fractures. They immediately began treating her, astonished that she had managed to reach the hospital on her own. When police arrived, Misty was still very weak, having just undergone several emergency surgeries to save her life. Despite this, she was conscious and able to speak to them. Misty told them, in a disoriented and fragmented way, what had happened. She and her friend Tanya Smith had gone across town to meet friends at a Halloween-themed party. Afterward, they planned to return to Misty's house for the night. Misty's parents were still at work, so the girls decided to stop by another classmate's house first. As Misty and Tanya walked through a neighborhood full of young people, a strange man suddenly appeared and forced them into a bush by the roadside. Everything happened so quickly they couldn't react. He led them to a secluded forest where no one could hear their cries for help, and then ordered them to undress. Tanya obeyed out of fear, but Misty decided to fight back, believing they wouldn't survive otherwise. The attacker had a bat. When Tanya finished undressing, he threw her clothes aside and prepared to assault her. At that moment, Misty grabbed the bat and struck him several times. But she was too weak to overpower him. He quickly turned on her, wrestled the bat from her hands, and struck her repeatedly on the head. Doctors later determined that Misty had been hit at least 7 times, leaving her with multiple skull fractures. Fortunately, she survived, but her attacker was unaware. When she awoke, both the attacker and her friend were gone. Using the last of her strength, she made her way to the hospital. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, police immediately launched a search for Tanya. They went to the area Misty described and found signs of disturbed ground, evidence that confirmed an attack had taken place there. However, they found no trace of Tanya that night. The search resumed early Saturday morning. More police officers and local volunteers joined in, all hoping Tanya had survived. Meanwhile, about 30 kilometers outside Abbotsford, a fisherman noticed some clothing hanging from bushes near a river. Thinking it looked suspicious, he contacted the police. An officer responded and found women's clothing at the scene. When he searched further downstream, he discovered the body of a young girl in the water. The victim was soon identified as 16-year-old Tanya Smith. Investigators also found tire tracks near the riverbank, suggesting Tanya was killed elsewhere, and her body was transported there to conceal evidence. Shoe prints, likely belonging to the attacker, were also found, and casts were taken of all the evidence. When the Abbotsford police received this information, a detective returned to the hospital to speak with Misty, the only possible witness who could describe the suspect. Unfortunately, her condition had worsened overnight. She was placed in an induced coma, while doctors performed several surgeries to reduce brain swelling. Misty remained in critical condition, and doctors were unable to predict whether she would survive. Meanwhile, the investigation continued with few clues. The motive and the identity of the attacker remained unknown. To protect Misty, the sole witness, police were stationed at the hospital around the clock. When the autopsy of Tanya Smith's body was completed, it revealed how brutal the attack had been. She had sustained head injuries similar to those of Misty, likely caused by the same bat. There were several deep scratches on her back, suggesting she may have been dragged across a metal object. One theory was that she was injured while being loaded into or pulled out of the car trunk. Water found in her lungs indicated she was still alive when thrown into the river, meaning she died from drowning, not her head wounds. During the evidence-gathering process, investigators discovered that Tanya had been subjected to abuse shortly before her death. The most revealing clue was a bite wound on her right breast, which contained enough biological material to create a DNA profile of the attacker. However, in 1995, DNA testing technology was limited, making the analysis process time-consuming. Even so, the ability to perform DNA testing was a major step forward, offering hope of obtaining information about the perpetrator. Furthermore, DNA results were then considered conclusive evidence in court. Even so, the wait for results was quite long. During that time, investigators had to find a faster approach. They examined the bite marks, a crucial clue that helped forensic dentists identify the perpetrator's teeth. The dental analysis revealed that the perpetrator had crooked, chipped, and cracked front teeth. Saliva samples were also collected from the bite mark for potential DNA matching, but a suspect was needed for comparison, lacking further evidence. Canadian authorities sought assistance from specialists in the United States. An American expert in forensics and psychiatry joined the investigation to develop a psychological profile of the killer. He quickly noted that abducting two victims at once was highly unusual, suggesting the perpetrator was confident, physically strong, and in control. The profile also indicated that he was likely a large, powerful man with a history of violent crimes, someone familiar with the area and skilled at hiding evidence and choosing isolated crime scenes. Investigators concluded the killer was likely a local resident rather than a traveler. At that time, the population of Abbotsford had exceeded 100,000. The police began thoroughly reviewing all individuals with criminal records, particularly those who had previously committed abuse-related offenses, but they still have not obtained any results. At the same time, detectives began questioning the friends who had spent the previous evening with Misty and Tanya, hoping to gather more information. They wanted to know if anyone had noticed something unusual, perhaps someone following the girls. Several suspicious men attended the party, including two young men who later drove Misty and Tanya home before they went to visit a classmate. Investigators collected tire and shoe prints but found no matches with the impressions discovered near Tanya's body. Everyone who knew the two young men insisted they were innocent, describing them as peaceful and without any history of violence. With no evidence linking them to the crime, detectives removed them from the suspect list. After analyzing the scene of the attack, the detectives concluded that the perpetrator was not an acquaintance of Misty and Tanya. The attacker appeared to be a stranger. Despite gathering much information, the investigation yielded no clues. The case reached a dead end. However, just a few days later, police received an anonymous call. The man on the call did not reveal his identity but described the crime scene in detail and claimed to be the perpetrator. Before hanging up, he mentioned an intimate detail about Tanya's injuries that had never been released to the public, proof that he was indeed involved. Unfortunately, the call was untraceable, as it came from a street payphone. Soon after, another call came in from the same voice. The caller continued to claim he had attacked the two girls and declared this wasn't the last case. This call also came from a payphone only a few blocks from the police station. Police patrols responded immediately, but by the time they arrived, the caller had vanished. Officers canvassed the area and questioned everyone nearby, but no one had seen anything suspicious. Security cameras were rare at the time, so there were no recordings. Forensic specialists checked the phone booth for fingerprints but found none. The reason became clear when the caller phoned again, boasting that he had worn gloves to avoid leaving evidence. This shows that the perpetrator is very knowledgeable about investigative procedures and experienced in eliminating evidence. He knew the police were looking for him and may even be monitoring them during the investigation. His actions suggested a deep understanding of police work, possibly a former officer, a relative of a police officer, or someone who had worked in the field. It's also possible he hated the police and wanted to mock them. Some theories suggest he had a history of violent crimes. However, no recent cases in Abbotsford matched this pattern. By the time Tanya Smith's funeral took place, the entire community knew about the tragedy, and widespread fear resulted in a large turnout. Police were present, closely monitoring and filming, believing the killer might appear to observe the public's reaction and gloat over his crime. But the funeral proceeded without incident. Soon afterward, another call came in. The same voice announced that he planned to strike again. The call was traced to a payphone near a bar, just a few blocks from the police station. Patrol cars were dispatched immediately, but still no one was caught. On November 17, more than a month after the initial attack, news arrived that Misty had survived and was finally released from the hospital. Her doctors called her recovery a true miracle, because she was still a key witness and potentially in danger. She and her family were placed in the witness protection program and moved directly from the hospital to a secret location. Their new home was over 100 kilometers away from the crime scene and considered secure. The family was strictly forbidden to reveal their whereabouts, even to close friends or relatives. Although Misty had physically recovered, she continued to suffer from deep psychological trauma. The police interviewed her again to get a description of the attacker and created a composite sketch based on her account. However, its accuracy was doubtful, as doctors had warned that Misty's memory was unreliable due to her condition. She had undergone multiple surgeries and was expected to live with the lasting effects of the assault, including partial memory loss and confusion. Nevertheless, lacking other clues, the police continued their investigation based on it. After releasing the composite sketch, they received several tips, but none were useful. The detectives then decided to change tactics when they found recordings of the killer's voice. A linguistics expert was invited to take part in the investigation and found that his voice had a distinctive timbre, which would likely allow local residents to recognize him. Short clips of the recording were released publicly alongside the composite sketch. Soon, a tip led to the identification of a local dealer in banned substances who resembled the sketch. He was a large, athletic ex-baseball player with a long criminal record. The police detained him easily, but when Misty saw him, she couldn't confirm he was her attacker. Further checks, including dental comparisons and voice analysis, proved he wasn't the perpetrator, and he was cleared as a suspect. Following this failure, public criticism of the police grew. Then, the situation worsened when the killer stopped making contact. The harassing calls ended, and investigators feared he had left the city. But on February 17, he resurfaced in a disturbing way. A caller contacted a local radio station and told the DJ to inspect a car outside. There, they found a radio playing music on Tanya Smith's grave, which had been placed there on the day of her funeral. According to a psychiatrist, this act indicated the killer was focused on instilling fear in a few people rather than the whole community. The criminal had also stolen Tanya's headstone and scrawled a threatening message on it, saying it was time for her to move again, this time to the cemetery. Soon after, a local woman reported that a wrench with a blue envelope taped to it had been thrown through her window. Inside was another message from Tanya Smith's killer. This time, the killer made a crucial mistake. Although he usually wore gloves, taping the envelope to the wrench left a partial fingerprint on the adhesive. Investigators were hopeful that this print would identify him through the national database. However, no matches were found, indicating the suspect had no previous criminal record. Attention then turned to the letter itself. In it, the writer claimed responsibility for several similar attacks, saying his first victim had been a girl he assaulted near Abbotsford Hospital. The second victim was a girl he abducted near a McDonald's. Another attack occurred about a year before the attack on Tanya and Misty. According to subsequent investigations, all the victims survived, but they did not report the incident to law enforcement. Notably, the first victim was a 12-year-old girl. When describing the attack, the perpetrator used police language. This confirmed the suspicion that he could be a former police officer or a current law enforcement officer, since none of the evidence led to the killer. Detectives decided to use special equipment installed in the police call center. It was designed to more quickly track calls, so that the next time someone tried to contact and harass law enforcement, they could more quickly and accurately identify the booth where the perpetrator was located. To reach the payphone as quickly as possible, several rapid response teams were created and strategically positioned throughout the city. This trap allowed the nearest payphone to be reached in about a minute. To motivate the criminal to call, a carefully crafted press release was once again used. His text was carefully crafted not to provoke the killer to commit another crime, but to entice him to call again with taunting remarks. But he seemed to sense he was being hunted, so he didn't respond. After this, many more clips of his voice were made, which continued to be broadcast on radio and television. Detectives hoped someone would recognize the distinctive voice and contact the police station. Soon, the police department's phone rang, but instead of the usual taunts, the dispatcher heard a female voice. The woman reported that the voice on the radio and television sounded like her son. The young man in question was named Terry Driver. He was immediately analyzed and found to have a connection to the police. He was the son of a retired Vancouver police officer who worked in criminal investigation. According to his mother, Terry had once also wanted to become a police officer, but was rejected because he failed psychological tests. He spent virtually his entire youth in institutions for troubled youth. Despite this, he had no criminal record, which was attributed to his father's connections. By 1995, he was working in a small printing house in Abbotsford. By comparing the dates, investigators discovered that every time he called the police station, he was absent from work. This added to the cosmic evidence against Terry. In everyday life, he seemed like a simple man. He was poor, lived in a middle-class home, had been involved in some violent incidents, was married, and had 2 children. He worked full-time. He seemed like an ordinary, unremarkable person, hard to spot. When photographs of this 31-year-old man were obtained, it turned out he looked nothing like the composite sketch Misty had given him. Although doctors had warned that the information could be seriously distorted, this now raised suspicions that they had once again found the wrong person. In any case, this lead had to be investigated. As soon as the police contacted Terry and asked about the connection with Tanya Smith and the mystic Carol, he immediately refused to cooperate and claimed he didn't understand what they were talking about. He was then asked to provide a DNA sample and fingerprints to eliminate him as a suspect. Terry refused and demanded a lawyer. By law, without compelling evidence, investigators could do nothing serious to stop the perpetrator. The maximum they could do was detain Terry for 24 hours and keep him under observation during that period. Nevertheless, he took the next step himself, suddenly agreeing to provide fingerprints on the condition that they be taken in the presence of a lawyer. When he called the station to report this, the officer on duty recognized the same mocking voice, Terry. Unaware that the police already had his partial fingerprint, felt no apprehension about providing it. When they were removed, 11 matches were found. This was enough to identify the man who killed Tanya Smith. The first people the detectives called after this were the Vengeance family. The capture of the criminal was a great relief to them. They could now feel safer. But they wanted the criminal convicted and finally taken off the streets. Once Terry was apprehended, investigators began analyzing and comparing all the information they had to put the prime suspect behind bars for good. They checked his computer and printer, where they found saved emails. They were identical to the note the criminal had thrown out the window with a wrench. Terry's dental and DNA samples also matched the traces found on Tanya's body. When reviewing security camera footage from Tanya's funeral, they realized Terry was also present. He even pretended to cry, while remaining quiet and inconspicuous. 2 years after the brutal attack, Terry's trial began with charges of first-degree murder and first-degree attempted murder. The prosecutor had compelling evidence against Terry, including irrefutable DNA, fingerprints, and dental records. Against this evidence, all justifications were rendered meaningless. Terry claimed that he only happened to discover Tanya and Misty after they had been attacked, that Tanya was already dead, and that he only abused her before taking Misty to the hospital. However, Missy denied this testimony. Terry also testified at trial that he suffers from Tourette's syndrome, obsessive-compulsive disorder, and attention deficit disorder. Despite his pleas for the court to consider these disabilities, the judge remained firm. The prosecution meticulously prepared the case, clearly demonstrating the motive for abuse, which convinced the jury. Terry Driver was convicted of all charges, even though his defense lawyer had made every effort to lessen the severity of his crimes. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole and incarcerated in 1997. In 2001, Terry appealed but failed, citing mental illness. Subsequent appeals were also denied. All this time, investigators continued to investigate Terry's involvement in the crimes he described in the note. At a later trial, he was found guilty of 2 more assaults. In 2006, his lawyer succeeded in having the court's decision overturned. Terry argued that he suffered from mental illness and was transferred from prison to the Abbotsford Treatment Centre for evaluation and treatment. The Correctional Service of Canada was criticized by the public for this decision. People did not want this dangerous man to be released. Misty's family was especially worried, as the offender had a greater chance of escape there. Misty finally found peace only on August 23, 2021, when she received word from the Correctional Service of Canada that Terry Driver had died in prison. His death certificate listed natural causes. That night in Thousand Oaks began like any other. Quiet, without a hint of anything unusual. But just hours later, a young man would die in his own apartment, stabbed 108 times by the woman he trusted completely. This isn't just a story about a seemingly harmless date or a simple marijuana try. It's a series of small, unconscious choices leading to an irreversible tragedy, where the line between victim and perpetrator blurs hauntingly. So what exactly happened behind those apartment doors? Was it a marijuana-induced psychosis, a silent, coerced act, or a tragedy the legal system was never prepared to confront? The answer will force us to reconsider the hardest questions about justice, about accountability, and about the true cost of a seemingly harmless decision. Chad O'Melia was born on September 27, 1991, in Santa Clarita, a city north of Los Angeles, California. His father, Sean O'Melia, was an Irish construction supervisor. His mother, Michelle, separated from his father when he was 5 years old. Despite the separation, his parents showed him great love and tried to provide him with a stable family. Chad is known for being intelligent, responsible, and loyal. To his friends, he was the dependable big brother, always ready to help or offer advice without expecting anything in return. From a young age, Chad developed a love for American football, a passion he kept throughout his teenage years. While attending Chico State University, Chad continued playing American football while studying accounting, and later graduated. After graduating, he moved to Thousand Oaks, Los Angeles, with his dog, Athena. He shared the apartment with a roommate, Vinny Oliveira, while working at an accounting firm. He was working toward becoming a certified public accountant (CPA), which left him with little time for rest. To cope with his sleepless nights, he began using cannabis to help him relax and fall asleep. According to Vinny, Chad often showed signs of being high when he was at home. His cannabis use wasn't a secret. His friends and parents both knew. Although his parents didn't approve, they considered it a relatively harmless habit compared to other risks young adults faced. Sean, Chad's father, shared that his son always respected him and never used marijuana in front of him because he knew he hated it. Sean viewed marijuana as a bad habit that negatively impacted his son's mind and will. However, he never imagined that this would be the beginning of tragedies that would change everything. It was this habit that would eventually bring Chad into contact with a woman who would lead him into a devastating nightmare. Bryn was born on January 25, 1991, in Chicago, Illinois. Her early life was filled with challenges. She experienced serious health issues that required multiple surgeries and heavy medications, which affected both her body and her mind from a young age. These medical treatments took a severe toll on her hearing. By age 4, she needed cochlear implants to improve her hearing and help her learn to read lips. Growing up, Bryn often felt isolated and different. In school, she was usually the only student with hearing loss and sometimes hid her hearing aids to avoid teasing. As she grew older, Bryn turned what once made her feel ashamed into a source of strength. She went on to pursue a doctorate in biology at the University of Washington School of Medicine and graduated in the 2010 seconds with distinction. One of her professors later described her as one of the most exceptional students he had ever taught. In August 2017, at age 26, Bryn moved to Thousand Oaks to work as a biologist for UCLA Health, which is connected to the David Geffen School of Medicine. At first, she rented an apartment that didn't allow pets, so she had to leave her beloved Siberian Husky, Aria, with her family in Illinois. In April 2018, Bryn found a new pet-friendly apartment and was joyfully reunited with Aria. 2 years earlier, she had trained Aria to be a service animal, and having her dog back gave her renewed happiness and balance. The pair were often seen walking through Conejo Creek Park in Thousand Oaks, one of Bryn's favorite places to unwind. It was at that same park where Bryn first met Chad in late April 2018. According to her, Chad was the one who approached her several times when their paths crossed. Finally, he asked for her phone number, but she refused. Still, Chad gave her his business card and told her to reach out if she ever wanted to hang out. Not long after, Bryn initiated contact with Chad, and their chance encounters quickly developed into a romantic relationship. They shared meals, spent time with friends, and once enjoyed a bottle of Irish whiskey together while watching their dogs play at the park. Bryn was drawn to Chad's humor, yet warmth and thoughtfulness. Although she initially doubted their compatibility, she soon realized they complemented each other perfectly, like two pieces of a puzzle. On Sunday, May 27, 2018, the day before Memorial Day, Bryn spent the evening drinking with friends. Later that night, Chad contacted her and invited her over. Around 10:30 p.m., 27-year-old Bryn arrived at Chad's apartment with her dog, Aria. The two relaxed, had a few drinks, and chatted with Chad's roommate, Vinny. Shortly after midnight, Chad took out his water pipe, packed it with cannabis, and stepped onto the balcony to smoke. Bryn soon joined him and asked to try it. As soon as she inhaled, her throat burned, and she began coughing. She mentioned that she had never enjoyed cannabis and never felt its effects like others did. Curious, Chad packed the pipe again with even more cannabis and encouraged her to try once more so she could finally experience a high. Bryn agreed and took another hit. What happened next was terrifying and surreal. In the early hours of May 28, Thousand Oaks police received a frantic 911 call from Vinny, reporting that something terrible was happening in the apartment. When officers arrived, their body cameras captured a horrific scene. Bryn violently attacked Chad, stabbing him multiple times with kitchen utensils before self-harming. Police attempted to subdue her using a taser 4 times, but she did not react. Officers then used their batons, striking her 9 times until she finally released the weapon. Bryn suffered 5 fractures in one arm and deep cuts to her neck, base, and right hand. She had also attacked her dog, Aria, but the animal miraculously survived. Chad, however, did not. When police reached him, he was already dead, having been stabbed 108 times. Bryn was rushed to the emergency room and underwent emergency surgery, which saved her life. She was later admitted for further recovery. Once she regained consciousness, investigators began questioning her. Still intubated and unable to speak, she wrote her responses, claiming she had told Chad she didn't want to smoke anymore, but that he had forced her to. Investigators suspected she had no memory of what had happened, a fact they confirmed with her a few days later. When Bryn's health stabilized, she was arrested and charged with murder. The tragedy devastated both families. Chad's father, Sean, had the heartbreaking duty of telling his ex-wife, Michelle, about their son's death. He explained that he wanted to tell Michelle himself to be there for her in that shattering moment. Sean remembered seeing the light fade from her eyes as she realized their son was gone. From then on, Michelle fell into a deep depression. Sean later reflected that losing a child leaves a crushing guilt, a sense that happiness may never return. Michelle experienced exactly that. Her grief compounded by her struggle with type 2 diabetes. After the funeral, Michelle felt undeserving of happiness. She refused to smile for photos or let anyone capture her appearing calm or content, believing that showing joy would disrespect her son's memory. Over time, this guilt consumed her, and she began to neglect her health. 18 months after Chad's death, she passed away from severe cardiac failure, having stopped her medical treatments. Sadly, Michelle didn't live to see the conclusion of Bryn's trial. Although no one can be certain, the repeated delays and eventual sentencing of her son's killer likely would have intensified her pain. Therefore, the first formal hearing was not held until November 9, 2023. In that long-awaited trial, Bryn Spacher, now 32 years old and fully recovered, finally testified before the jury. To aid Bryn's hearing impairment, real-time transcription monitoring devices were placed at both the witness stand and her table. Bryn began her testimony by describing her background and then recounted the night of May 27, 2018. She said that after smoking once, Chad encouraged her to try again. When she hesitated, he refilled the water pipe and urged her to inhale immediately to feel the effects. Bryn admitted that although he hadn't physically forced her, his insistence made her feel intimidated and unable to refuse. She testified that Chad wasn't always the gentle person others believed him to be. According to Bryn, she had seen flashes of his temper in the past, and those memories made her feel pressured to comply with his requests. Minutes after smoking a second time, she said she began to feel intensely disoriented. Time seemed to loop, their conversation repeated, and every moment blurred into the next, creating a powerful sense of déjà vu. Bryn testified that she quickly lost the ability to speak coherently, her words dissolving into confusion. Panicked, she went inside, lay down on the couch, and closed her eyes to try to calm down. Instead of finding relief, she began hearing voices and seeing vivid, hallucinatory images behind her closed eyelids. She described the experience as being trapped in an endless cycle of fear, at one point believing she had died and was now imprisoned inside her own body. She said she heard her loved ones crying over her lifeless body and even felt their touch. But what she described next was even more surreal. Bryn claimed she had an out-of-body experience, observing from above as her body lay still on the couch. From that perspective, she said she saw Chad crying beside her while paramedics tried to revive her. Before continuing, she emphasized that everything after that point felt like watching a movie rather than living through it. In her account, she saw herself walking through the apartment, pushing chairs aside before entering the kitchen, where she grabbed 2 knives and threw them at Chad. Then, detached from any sense of control, she took 2 more knives and attacked one of the dogs. Bryn recalled hearing Chad's voice asking why she had hurt Athena, though she later learned it had actually been Arya. Moments later, she approached Chad, raised a knife, and then everything went black. Even while unconscious, she said she could still hear voices in her head, urging her to keep going. Among those voices were Vinny's panicked shouts as he ran from the apartment to get help. Bryn's hallucinations seemed endless, distorting her sense of time so much that she could no longer tell minutes from hours. Overwhelmed by the voices, she heard herself before everything faded away. When she regained consciousness briefly and incompletely, she was met not by clarity, but by chaos. She felt jolts of electricity rippling through her body as officers fired their tasers. Though in her disoriented state, she believed they were using a defibrillator to bring her back to life. She remembered waking up in the hospital as investigators began questioning her about the night's events. Her recollection, however, was fragmented, blurred between what had actually happened and what she might have imagined during her hallucinations. It wasn't until 2 days later that police informed her she had killed Chad. During the trial, the defense referred to forensic tests conducted on a water pipe found at the scene and brought in an expert to explain the results. Experts say that tests for detecting banned substances are not always completely accurate, as some compounds may go undetected. While the report confirmed the presence of THC, the main psychoactive compound in cannabis, the specialist noted that the substance could have been mixed with other drugs. This possibility was especially plausible if Chad had purchased the marijuana from an unlicensed dealer, who might have added other substances to enhance its effects or reduce costs. Although recreational marijuana was already legal in California at the time, Bryn's defense team argued that an important detail had been overlooked. Chad's roommate, Vinny, had also smoked the same substance earlier that night and claimed to have experienced hallucinations. The defense used this to argue that Bryn, an inexperienced user, didn't know what she was consuming and had been pressured into trying it without understanding the potential risks. Their case was supported by testimony from people who knew Bryn personally. Several former classmates stated that Bryn had always avoided banned substances, even distancing herself from friends who used them. One of them, 33-year-old Amy Kerouac, met Bryn in 2007 and described how they became close in high school through shared interests. While Bryn played basketball and Amy played softball, both bonded over their love of outdoor activities like hiking and camping, which were uncommon among their peers. Bryn's first encounter with marijuana occurred in 2014 while she was dating Kevin, a former Marine and personal trainer. During a camping trip in the Washington Mountains, they decided to try a joint but quickly found they didn't enjoy it. Kevin later said he believed Chad may have pressured Bryn into smoking on the night in question in 2018. Although Bryn and Kevin broke up in 2017 when she moved to California, he described her as easygoing, kind, and genuine. Given these circumstances, the defense built their argument around the idea that Bryn had been unknowingly intoxicated. According to the California Penal Code, a person may be exempt from criminal liability if they commit an offense under duress or as a result of consuming a controlled substance without their knowledge. Despite this reasoning, the jury rejected the defense's argument. The biggest obstacle for both sides was Bryn's written statement to police while she was hospitalized. In it, she admitted that she had voluntarily taken a second hit from Chad's pipe. Later, Bryn claimed the document had been withheld from the prosecution for some time. However, during one hearing, the prosecutor presented new evidence that significantly altered the case. She portrayed Bryn very differently, presenting text messages from 2018 between Bryn and her friends. In these messages, Bryn wrote about getting so high that she had to miss work the next day and mentioned eating cannabis-infused edibles. This evidence allowed the prosecution to question not only Bryn's earlier statements but also her overall credibility. The prosecutor also highlighted that in most of Bryn's interviews with investigators and doctors, she never mentioned being pressured or coerced. Bryn responded directly to these accusations, saying she sometimes exaggerated when talking with friends, but maintained she had never been so intoxicated that she blacked out or missed work because of marijuana. The only time she had been late, she said, was once after drinking alcohol. Regarding the interrogations, she explained that she didn't repeat every detail because she thought the detectives already knew the facts. After repeatedly restating her responses to challenge the prosecution's claims, the defense called mental health experts to testify. Their evaluations confirmed that Bryn had no history of mental illness or violent tendencies, supporting the argument that her actions were the result of a marijuana-induced psychotic episode. This evidence seriously weakened the prosecution's case and led the jury to reduce the charge. On December 1, 2023, after just 4 hours of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. Bryn Spacher was guilty of involuntary manslaughter, not murder. The decision shocked Chad's family and friends, who had hoped for a harsher outcome. On the evening of January 22, 2024, the night before sentencing, Chad's loved ones gathered outside the county government building to demand justice and a punishment that reflected the brutality of his death. The following day, the courtroom was packed with people, including members of the public, journalists, and Chad's family. When Bryn took the stand one final time, She delivered an emotional apology to Chad's family, addressing her words especially to his father, who continued to mourn his son without Michelle by his side. After nearly 6 years of waiting and suffering, the judge handed down the sentence. Bryn received 2 years of probation, instead of the 5 years of imprisonment initially recommended. She also had to complete 100 hours of community service, focusing on education about marijuana-induced psychosis. The judge warned that any violation of probation would result in immediate imprisonment. In the aftermath, Sean O'Melia, still mourning his son, denounced the ruling as unfair and biased, suggesting that Bryn's gender and race may have influenced the court's leniency. He also expressed concern that the verdict sent a dangerous message, implying that marijuana users could excuse reckless or criminal acts. Sean suggested that Bryn needed a psychiatric evaluation to better understand the biological causes, as he believed that marijuana alone could not explain the full severity of her psychosis. The prosecutor also shared this concern, arguing that the sentence was too lenient, setting a dangerous precedent and damaging the credibility of the justice system. She argued that classifying the case as involuntary manslaughter ignored the brutality of the act, describing it as one of the most disturbing cases in her 29-year career. The outcome of Bryn's trial and Chad's tragic death fueled a broader public debate about recreational marijuana use. A leading forensic psychiatrist noted that the growing acceptance of cannabis has led to widespread misinformation about its risks. He emphasized that while psychotic reactions are uncommon, they can be severe, and studies show a clear link between cannabis use and psychosis. As public criticism mounted, Bryn's trial became a focal point for larger discussions about marijuana's potential dangers. People began to question whether cannabis directly causes violent behavior or acts only as a trigger when combined with other psychological or environmental factors. Some nights, Sandra Melgar lies awake in her small prison cell, unable to stop herself from reflecting on how drastically her life has changed. Never, in her wildest imagination, did she think she would end up a widow? And later, the prime suspect in her husband's murder. It seemed unimaginable that, a year and a half after his death, a grand jury would quietly indict her, and that nearly 5 years later, a jury would convict her based solely on circumstantial evidence. There was no clear motive, no eyewitnesses, no physical evidence directly linking her to the crime. Now, at 59 years old, every day since her husband's death has been nothing short of a nightmare. Sandra has been incarcerated at the William P. Hobby Unit, a women's prison set in the quiet Texas countryside. She continues to stay in touch with friends and family, many of whom still firmly believe she is innocent. Sandra spends a couple of hours most weekends with rotating groups of family and supporters. She speaks regularly with her daughter and only child, Elizabeth Liz Melgar Rose. Though the loud prison environment and Sandra's gentle voice often make conversations difficult, Liz has become her mother's strongest advocate, taking on the role of spokesperson and passionately arguing that a terrible injustice has cost her both her father and her mother. She continues to struggle with the memories of that night. December 23, 2012, the night her husband died. Her inability to recall the events clearly has long fueled investigators' suspicions. But Sandra has remained firm. She did not kill her husband. As she lies awake in her cell, her thoughts drift back to the hours before everything changed, when she and her husband, Jamie Jim Melgar, celebrated their 32nd wedding anniversary on the evening of December 22, soaking in their jacuzzi tub and enjoying what should have been a peaceful night together. That night, Sandra said she awoke to the frantic barking of their dogs. Her vision was blurred as she tried to orient herself in the dark. Her head pounded and her body ached. She found herself lying on the closet floor, her hands and feet tied behind her back, her undergarments soiled. At 5 feet 4 inches tall, with 2 hip replacements limiting her mobility, Sandra tried to stretch her legs and roll far enough to peer under the closet door. But the bindings dug into her skin, and a chair had been wedged under the doorknob from outside, trapping her inside. The bedroom looked ransacked. Drawers hung open, clothes, pill bottles, and books littered the floor. Sandra's black purse and red wallet had been emptied across the blood-speckled white comforter. A small white medical stool at the foot of the bed was smeared with blood, as though a knife had been placed on it. The back of a wooden chair carried streaks of dried red. In the partially filled jacuzzi tub, where they had celebrated just hours earlier, police found a white blouse, a green towel, and a silver 6-inch chef's knife. Blood droplets along the tub's edge painted the chilling picture of what had happened. The knife was later confirmed to be the murder weapon. Sandra and Jim had spent the evening celebrating their enduring love, marking their 32nd wedding anniversary with dinner at their favorite Mexican restaurant. Afterward, they planned to continue the celebration in their jacuzzi. Candles lit, cocktails mixed, strawberries and whipped cream set aside. Even after more than 3 decades of marriage, Jim and Sandra remained deeply connected, something Sandra later emphasized to investigators. Their story began during their senior year at Lamar High School. Jim, with his unruly black hair and slightly awkward teenage mustache, was instantly captivated by the blue-eyed, blonde 17-year-old who sat in front of him in class. Sandra, however, brushed him off for weeks until she finally agreed to join him and a group of friends for ice skating. Only when she showed up did she realize the outing was orchestrated. Jim's best friend vanished moments after she arrived. Jim's teenage charm and hopelessly corny jokes won her over. Sandra admired his humor, intellect, and compassion, while Jim loved her intelligence, grounded personality, and complete lack of pretension. The two became inseparable. And in 1980, 2 years after graduating high school, they married in a simple courthouse ceremony in downtown Houston. In the jacuzzi that anniversary night, Sandra and Jim reminisced about their decades together and talked about the future they still hoped to share. They dreamed aloud about selling their home, traveling across the country, seeing the Grand Canyon, exploring Ireland, watching the Northern Lights. Jim, only 5 months away from retiring after a long career as a computer programmer for the Houston Independent School District, imagined buying a beach house where they could eventually settle after their travels. They took turns giving each other massages, and the evening ended in a moment of intimacy. After 2 peaceful hours in the jacuzzi, Sandra said their dogs suddenly began barking. Jim wrapped a towel around himself and slipped into Sandra's slippers before heading out of the bathroom to calm them. She had no idea it would be the last moment she would ever see her husband alive. When Sandra awoke nearly 15 hours later, she was lying on the closet floor, her hands and feet bound behind her back, her body stiff and aching, her undergarments soiled. Jim was gone. The dogs were barking again, but this time, she also heard voices inside the house. Terrified, she began screaming. Just after 4:30 a.m. that afternoon, Jim's brother, Herman Melgar, stood outside the front door, confused by the silence. Jim had invited Herman and his family over for dinner, but now neither he nor Sandra were answering the phone or the doorbell. Jim's black truck was still in the driveway, and Sandra's silver car sat in the open garage. Herman told his family to stay near the front step while he checked the backyard. Looking over the fence, he noticed a plastic tarp hanging from the pergola, a sign of the home improvement project Jim had been working on. Returning to the driveway, Herman decided to try the laundry room door inside the garage. If it was locked, he planned to leave. But to his surprise, the door opened. Inside, the house was dim, gray, and stifling. With all the blinds drawn, the dogs barked frantically as Herman opened the front door, creating an eerie, unsettling atmosphere that his daughter Marissa Campos later described with a shiver. Something just didn't feel right, she recalled. Then they heard the muffled screams. Herman rushed toward the back of the house and found a large chair wedged against the bathroom closet door. He pushed it aside and discovered Sandra on the floor in a black satin nightgown, crying out for help. Herman and his wife, Maria, tried to untie the ropes binding Sandra's arms and legs. Herman grabbed a pair of scissors from the counter to cut through the tight restraints. The whole time, Sandra kept repeating, "Where's Jim? Where's Jim?" Her arms showed multiple bruises, including a dark one on her left bicep. Once she was free, she staggered into the bedroom and immediately saw Jim's feet sticking out of the closet. She knelt to check his pulse, but his cold, pale, naked body made it clear he was dead. Sandra gently covered him with a blue jacket. Maria then led her back to the bathroom. Sandra was hysterical when paramedics arrived, making it difficult for her to communicate with Stephanie Roberts, the first medic on the scene. Roberts noted in her report that Sandra appeared to be in shock, cycled between crying spells, and had no concept of time. Sandra believed it was still around 1 o'clock a.m. She had no idea it was already evening and that roughly 15 hours had passed nearby. In the bedroom closet lay her husband, Jim, with whom she had lived for 32 years, dead. He had suffered 31 stab wounds to his chest and hands. The closet walls were stained with blood. A gray telephone cord bound his ankles. According to the medical examiner, every wound was defensive. Jim had fought desperately for his life. One blow had nearly severed his right thumb, which explained the extensive blood spatter throughout the closet and bedroom. Police observed bruising on Sandra's hands and arms, along with a small scratch on her left thumb. There was no visible blood on her. Sandra told officers that after Jim went to bring the dogs inside, she got out of the jacuzzi and walked into her closet to get dressed. The next thing she remembers is waking up at an unknown time in the closet. She recalled screaming for help at one point, but believed she may have slipped back into unconsciousness, possibly due to a seizure. Sandra's health had long been complicated by several medical conditions, including lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, and grand mal seizures. Because of the seizures, she had resigned from her job as a licensed vocational nurse, believing she could no longer safely perform her duties. In the weeks leading up to Jim's death, she had been experiencing auras, the warning signs that a seizure was coming. She explained to police that after seizures, she often slept for hours, waking up confused, disoriented, and in significant pain while crime scene investigators combed through the house. Sandra was taken to an interrogation room at the Harris County Sheriff's Office. She complained repeatedly about the cold temperature, saying she was shaking and freezing. Sergeant Sean Carrizal and Detective James Doucet questioned her for nearly 3 hours about the 36 hours leading up to Jim's death. Sandra spoke softly, said she had a headache, and struggled to maintain her composure. She was able to recall certain moments clearly: removing her boots in the bedroom, changing clothes in the bathroom, and details of their conversation in the jacuzzi. But her memory was hazier in other areas, and she admitted she was having trouble remembering everything. She initially claimed Jim had been outside with the dogs for 15 minutes before she got out of the jacuzzi, but later said it might have been only 5 minutes. When asked about the inconsistency, Sandra admitted that she was terrible with time. She was just guessing. When Sean asked about their future plans, Sandra leaned forward, buried her face in her hands, and began to cry. Sean suggested she might have had a role in Jim's death, but Sandra abruptly cut him off. Detective James encouraged her to take a polygraph and asked if she was familiar with the exam and willing to try one. Sandra refused. She said she was nervous, shaking, cold, and afraid the results would be used against her. She insisted she needed to speak with an attorney first. The detectives tried to reassure her that they weren't trying to pin something on her. Her refusal, however, seemed to frustrate Douay, who took it as a sign she might be hiding something. As the interrogation neared its end, the detectives grew increasingly frustrated with what they saw as gaps in her memory. They questioned how she could have blacked out while her husband, whom she claimed to love deeply, was being brutally stabbed just feet away. They asked why she hadn't heard him scream. Sean and James eventually stepped out of the cold, cramped interview room, leaving Sandra alone, crying with her face buried in her hands. Later that night, Sean contacted the Harris County District Attorney's Office to pursue murder charges. Sandra remained at the station while crime scene investigators continued combing through her home. Ultimately, prosecutors declined to file charges. Citing insufficient evidence, news of Jim's murder spread quickly through the neighborhood. Worried residents gathered outside, speaking in low voices about the possibility of a home invasion gone wrong and wondering whether the killer might return. Some neighbors responded by installing new cameras, security lights, and additional locks. Neighbors described the Melgers as a quiet, private couple who mostly kept to themselves. Occasionally, they would see Jim working in the yard or Sandra coming and going through the garage. One neighbor later recalled being in his garage until 1 a.m., the night of the murder. Noted that he hadn't seen or heard anything suspicious. 2 days after the murder, Liz met with Sean and James. She told them that several items were missing from the house, including a bedroom television and bottles of Sandra's hydrocodone and phenobarbital. She had also previously informed detectives about a backpack containing a gaming console and games that had been left in the garage. Liz continued making follow-up calls, hoping something might help. Eventually, investigators stopped responding, leaving both Liz and Sandra uncertain about the status of the case. A year and a half later, in July 2014, Sandra was quietly indicted for Jim's murder by a grand jury. Because grand jury proceedings are sealed under state law, the public had no insight into what evidence or testimony was presented. Even after the indictment, the case moved slowly. Over the next 3 years, it passed through the hands of at least 4 different prosecutors before landing on the desk of Colleen Barnett in May 2017. Barnett had recently returned to the DA's office after a 4-year break under newly elected district attorney, Kim Ogg. Throughout her 24-year career, she had earned a reputation for thoroughness and fairness. According to colleagues and defense attorneys who had tried cases against her, she had prosecuted more than 70 murder trials, including the capital murder case of Suzanne Basso, who was executed for luring a mentally disabled man to Texas with promises of marriage and then killing him. Barnett understood the challenges of Sandra's case. No clear motive, no confession, and no direct forensic evidence tying Sandra to Jim's death. During the 13-day trial in August 2017, Barnett portrayed Sandra as a calculating wife who had methodically planned Jim's murder, luring him into their bedroom with the promise of intimacy. According to the prosecution, Sandra tied Jim's ankles with a gray telephone cord before stabbing him. Barnett pointed to a bag of adult toys found on the bed, which Sandra said was a gag gift from a friend, as proof that she had staged the scene to support her story. Barnett acknowledged that she could not present a definitive motive, offering the jury several possible explanations instead. Jim's Houston Independent School District life insurance policy, or Sandra's alleged desire to end their marriage, but being unable to divorce because of her Jehovah's Witness faith. Sandra's attorney, George MacSecrist, presented a very different narrative. He described Sandra as a vulnerable, physically fragile woman who had been railroaded by investigators determined to pin the crime on her. He emphasized the fact that detectives had attempted to charge Sandra with murder while the crime scene investigation team was still processing the evidence, suggesting that the investigators had a biased view from the outset. First emphasized the absence of physical evidence tying Sandra to the crime. There was no trace of her blood at the scene, nor any cuts on her hands. He presented an alternate explanation, that Sandra had been the victim of a home invasion, struck on the head, bound inside her closet, and left helpless while intruders murdered her husband. For the jury, the courtroom showdown between Barnett and Seacrest often resembled a heavyweight boxing match. with the two attorneys trading strategic blows. One of Barnett's strongest punches came through the testimony of Celestina Rossi, a blood spatter analyst and crime scene reconstruction expert with the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office. Rossi testified that the scene did not support the theory of a home invasion. There were no signs of forced entry. The bedroom dresser drawers had not been rifled through, and a lit candle on Jim's nightstand indicated no struggle had taken place near the closet where Jim was killed. Rossi explained that most of the blood was concentrated inside the closet, aside from spatter on the back of a chair, the medical stool, and a few speckles on the comforter. She believed this spatter came from damage to an artery near Jim's thumb. She agreed with the medical examiner that all of Jim's injuries were defensive wounds. She also pointed out that Jim's loaded handgun, found inches from his body, appeared untouched. After 8 hours of deliberation over several days, the jury found Sandra guilty of murder. They sentenced her to 27 years in prison, far below the 99-year maximum. When District Judge Kelly Johnson read the verdict, Sandra let out a sharp cry and nearly collapsed into her seat. The courtroom, packed with supporters convinced the trial would end in her exoneration, fell silent in disbelief. For weeks, they had tried to reassure Sandra that everything would be fine. But in an instant, that hope shattered. As she was escorted out of the courtroom, wearing a red blazer and leaning heavily on her cane, Sandra stopped to embrace Liz one final time. When they pulled apart, Liz collapsed to the floor. She recalled that she just remembered the room spinning and that she had felt completely alone. She said that everyone had expected a not guilty verdict, and when it hadn't come, she couldn't even describe it. She added that she had already lost her dad, that the person who had done it had walked free, and that her mom was now paying the price. She concluded that she had lost both of her parents to a justice system that had gotten everything wrong. Sandra's supporters directed their anger at Barnett, accusing her of twisting Sandra's statements, weaponizing her religious beliefs, and building a narrative that had no basis in reality. The jury foreman, however, insisted that Barnett's interpretation of events made the most sense. He said Sandra's shifting timeline, when they returned home, how long Jim had been out of the jacuzzi, when she went to the closet, undermined her credibility. He also questioned the authenticity of her reported seizure, noting that her medical records did not reflect any instability in her condition and that she never mentioned a seizure during her post-murder neurologist appointment. A month after the verdict, Seacrest filed a motion for a new trial, laying out in an 88-page brief why he believed Sandra had been wrongfully convicted. He argued that the investigation was deeply flawed, led by detectives who, from the beginning, were guided by a predetermined theory rather than evidence. According to Seacrest, the prosecution's case rested on speculation and assumptions that had no solid foundation. Sandy didn't kill Jamie, he insisted. However, Judge Johnson denied the motion, initiating what could become a long and difficult appeals process. Sandra's final chance to prove her innocence. When interviewed behind a glass partition at the prison's visitation center this past July, Sandra once again firmly denied killing her husband. Sandra now places her hopes in the appeals process, or in the possibility of parole. Her first eligibility date is February 2031, at which point she will be 71 years old.